on the Dali and just how this happened.
Well, the Dali, of course, is a ship that was Singapore flagged, had been chartered by Maersk and was carrying cargo of Maersk customers. Now, what is the law here in Maryland is that the ship actually needed to be piloted in Maryland waters by authorities from the state. So that was who would have been in charge of the vessel at the time this happened. But our understanding at this point, based on the briefings reporters have received from authorities, is essentially that there was a power outage. They lost propulsion, the ability to control the vessel, and they did notify port authorities here in Maryland of that. So Wes Moore, actually, the governor, talked in the briefing about how authorities did have time to make sure that no more vehicles came onto the bridge. They were able to halt more traffic because they did get warning, a mayday from the ship that this was happening. But ultimately, this was a ship, according to the governor, that was traveling at 8 knots speed, relatively fast considering they were just coming down the river, and ultimately could not be stopped from colliding into the structural support. So again, as we heard from the president, as we've heard repeatedly from other authorities, really just looks like a terrible, tragic accident that, of course, will have consequences, human most immediately, regionally, and even nationally as well.
Kaylee, you've been on the ground for a few hours. Just describe the scene and what you've been noticing over that time frame.
Well, there are hundreds of people here, Carol. Obviously, a very large media presence from local media here in the DMV area to national media, as well as there have been other trucks, things carrying equipment, even some trailers up to the point of the road that we at least are able to see. Of course, the road ultimately just hits a dead end, and there is nothing beyond it because of that part of the bridge had collapsed. But starting to see some equipment coming in, and of course, I am watching really at this hour for any time now. The Transportation Secretary, Pete Buttigieg, is expected to be here on site at the invitation of Governor Moore to work with authorities here as this effort is underway. He will likely reiterate a lot of what we've already heard from President Biden in terms of the federal government providing support, not just to the search and rescue effort, but the reconstruction effort as well, and any funding that might require. And even more immediately, I would point out at 2:30 p.m. Eastern time, we are expecting right here behind me the NTSB to be delivering a briefing to the press. And of course, we'll keep all updated on those developments as we get them.
Yeah, and we will take those briefings live as we do get them. Hey, Kaylee, I know you mentioned it's a search and rescue operation is what's happening right now. That is our focus. And the other questions will certainly come later. It does raise questions about what happens to shipping out of Baltimore and what happens on the global shipping front. What can you tell us about the importance of the port and where some of the port traffic will go, and how this could snarl a really delicate balance when it comes to global trade?
Yeah, of course, we're all still reeling from the supply chain impacts we saw during COVID-19. And in some ways, that may make actually more cargo operators and those coordinating these shipments to be a little bit more prepared and being able to reroute things. But that will likely be necessary. And frankly, for an unknown period of time, as you allude to, Tim, this is a very important port. It is actually the busiest port in the country and has been for 13 years in a row in terms of the import and export of automobiles, of vehicles, cars, light trucks. Almost 850,000 of them went through this port in 2023, and that is now going to be likely heavily disrupted. We already, of course, have heard from the Ford executives speaking on Bloomberg earlier, talking about how they're going to need to reroute some things in terms of car parts, for example. GM has indicated they'll have to reroute as well. And it's not just the auto industry that could be affected here. There's also a number of key commodities that come in and out of this port, one being coal. We're talking tens of millions of tons per year. That could be disrupted in terms of those exports for an unknown period of time. Really, there's just a lot of transit, seaborne transit in particular, that is going to have to go elsewhere, whether that's north to places like New Jersey and New York and those ports there, or south to the likes of Norfolk in Virginia. But there's going to have to be movement around, and that's just in terms of what moves over water. Of course, there is a huge part of I-695 that is now collapsed and is also submerged, and ground traffic, commuter traffic, and just freight distribution is going to be disrupted as well.
All right, going to leave it there. Hey, Kaylee, thank you so much. Bloomberg co-host of Balance of Power, Kaylee Lyons. And we want to continue on the shipping impact and the significance of this port in Baltimore. It is one of the busiest ports, as we heard from Kaylee, on the U.S. East Coast. With more on that side of the story, let's bring in Bloomberg News trade czar Brendan Murray joining us from London. Brendan, we know this is a major distribution hub, the biggest in Maryland. Specifically, share with us some more about size and scope and the significance of this port to the U.S. supply chain.
Yeah, it's not a giant port for containers, but as your previous guest mentioned, there are there's a diverse array of products that and goods that move in and out of Baltimore, cars, coal, gypsum, and a lot of construction equipment. So, and farming equipment. We're getting close to planting season for farmers. We're getting close to sort of spring construction season. So those kinds of things could cause some logistical snarls or hiccups here in the weeks and months ahead. A lot of this cargo will be diverted to places nearby, like New York or Norfolk, Virginia. Although one of the major car terminals that would be an option for Baltimore is in Brunswick, Georgia, and so that's hundreds of miles to the south. So you can imagine the delays that are going to be involved in shipping something from Georgia up the East Coast as opposed to bringing it in through Baltimore. So it's those kinds of wrinkles that are going to have to be worked out over the coming weeks. But they're still sort of untangling the mess. The port itself, some of those auto terminals are on the ocean side of the bridge, so they're not going to be affected. Some of it is on the other side of the bridge, which is apparently going to be closed for a long time. So there's still a lot of details to work out about the extent of the disruptions, but there are going to be some at least minor disruptions for a while, and they may sort of snowball if they can't work these out here over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about. You use terms like hiccups and snarl and wrinkles. At what point do they become bigger disruptions that can affect the greater U.S. and perhaps even global economy? Is that possible with a tragedy like this?
Well, we saw a pretty clear example during the pandemic that an extra 10 or 20% of cargo coming into another port that's not really ready for it can cause major congestion. That's what happened in Los Angeles when a lot of consumer demand in the U.S. picked up, and you kind of had this sort of accordion effect where the rail lines couldn't move the goods out of the port, and then the truckers couldn't move so it just kind of has this domino effect. So we definitely saw that. So if this cargo's got to divert elsewhere, the other ports, if there's not capacity to handle and absorb that extra cargo, then you could see ships backed up. To the extent to which we don't know yet, but that kind of thing can definitely happen, as we've seen before.
Brendan, too, and I think, and you note this in your story, let's not forget that, distribution warehouses, right? It's always, we talk about it as a great real estate play. A lot of investors do, but nonetheless, there are some massive distribution warehouses from the likes of Amazon, FedEx, Under Armour, Home Depot, car companies like around that area in particular. So I guess we're all kind of waiting to see what those companies maybe say specifically about that, but that's another aspect to this story.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, these distribution centers are, many of them are automated. So, you start throwing curveballs at them like this, and the whole system can kind of lock up. So there are definitely going to be problems regionally with shipping around Baltimore and the sort of the Philadelphia to Washington corridor. The truck traffic is going to be, all the hazardous materials have to go over that bridge. That bridge no longer is passable, so it's going to have to go somewhere else. It can't go through the Baltimore Harbor Tunnel. So, you're looking at, a lot of extra traffic is going to be pushed on different roadways. And, that's the middle of the Eastern Corridor where lots of goods flow north and south.
But as you said, still a lot to work out. And we'll find out whether or not what could be minor disruptions become something much more major. Brendan, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Bloomberg News Trade Czar Brendan Murray joining us there from London. All right, that is without a doubt our top national story. Let's get to one of our top market stories. And that is, Tim, about what former President Donald Trump's social media startup, it actually began trading today as a new entity.
Whipsawing, they'll higher right now by 46%. This after the most high-profile blank check deal in years added billions of dollars to the former president's fortune, at least on paper. Shares of Trump Media and Technology Group jumped as much as 58% earlier in the day. It did pair some gains, and it also triggered a brief volatility-related trading halt just after the market opened. All
right, the ticker, by the way, DJT for Donald J. Trump. So let's get more on this story. The company, its fundamentals, and the trade. For that, we bring in Bloomberg News equities reporter Bailey Lipschultz here in studio. Big gain here.
Big gain.
Remind us about, how this all came to be. And I want to get to what fundamentally is this company and what its balance sheet looks like.
Yeah, so Carol, this all started back in October 2021. There was a blank check company that traded under DWAC, Digital World Acquisition Corp. Struck a deal to take Trump Media and Technology Group public back then. Really wasn't much meat to the company.
But there's a lot going on in the SPAC universe at that point.
But that was, the SPAC market was correcting, but it was still 2021. The markets were still, well, they are at all-time highs now, but it was a very different market. Interest rates were essentially zero. People wanted to gamble. We saw the stock rip from about $10 to $175. Right now, we're still at $73 as this company's deal has closed, and this is a publicly traded company. But it did bring public Trump Media and Technology Group. The crown jewel of the company is Truth Social. That is the social media app that is Donald Trump's preferred megaphone, and that's where a lot of his fans and investors apparently kind of rally behind and post memes and GIFs and communicate with each other and cheer on the former president.
The market valuation, I think many could argue right now, is one that doesn't necessarily adhere to the fundamentals of the company's revenue and, well, non-existent bottom line at this point, Bailey. Talk to us about short interest, and because you have a story about how expensive it is to short this stock.
Yeah, right now it is, for all intents and purposes, the most expensive and likely riskiest stock to short. So calling back shades of meme stock mania when GameStop was trading detached from its fundamentals. Tim, you mentioned the point valuation, right about at $10 billion.
It's the same as Reddit.
Yeah, basically that's the best comparison. Reddit is expected to do $1 billion in revenue next year. Trump Media Group did $3 million of revenue in the 9 months that ended in September. Wow. So if you slap on a traditional valuation metric, which is ill-advised for any meme stock, you're looking at a company that trades about $10 billion that, if you even round up, is bringing in about $6 million in an annual period. So that is about as far detached from fundamental value. The argument could be made for bulls that if Trump does win presidency, if he does stay on Truth Social, if everyone in the world has to create a Truth Social account, if companies are going to advertise there, it's very meta, but that is the bull case that I've heard from investors.
Yeah, I've heard some too. There's a bunch of stuff being written today. I do wonder too if it's kind of a metric for how well the president is doing in the lead up to the November race. If some people kind of see that as a little bit of a metric and something worth following. It's just there's a lot of stuff out there.
No, exactly. And we saw the stock jump 88% the day that we saw DeSantis drop out of the race. So this has been a stock that, again, because it was a SPAC merger, it traded as a blank check company under DWAC. It was up 185% year to date through Monday's close.
In terms of percentage of shares that Donald Trump owns,
About
what do
60%.
we know? About 60%.
So billions of dollars of paper wealth. He would, if shares trade above 1750 for 20 of 30 days, he will get additional shares, which could be worth another $1.5 billion.
All right, Bailey, really appreciate it. Bloomberg News equities reporter Bailey Lipschultz there with the latest on that. Still ahead, we're going to hear from BlackRock CEO Larry Fink. He is featured in one of our most read stories on the Bloomberg. He's coming up next right here on Bloomberg Business Week.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with his Bloomberg Business Flash. Major indexes climbing today as stocks rebound from yesterday's losses. Investor Kathy Wood buying more than $28 million worth of Tesla shares. That right now, most active stock, and up about 4%. Then, as you've been talking, Trump Media and Technology Group debuting on the stock market today on the NASDAQ. Right now, it is up 47, call it 48%. And Visa, MasterCard agreeing to cap credit card swipe fees. This is a deal that U.S. merchants say is going to save them at least $30 billion over 5 years. One of the most significant antitrust settlements ever. And it follows a legal fight that spanned almost 20 years. Visa shares right now up about 0.25%. Overall, the S&P 500 10 points higher. That's up 0.2%. 52.28 on the index. The Dow Jones Industrial Average 84 points higher. That's up 0.2%. The Nasdaq Composite Index 47 points higher. That is up 0.3%. Let's check Treasuries for you. 2-year yield 1 basis point higher. That's at 4.59. 10-year unchanged. The yield 4.24. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Carol and Tim.
All right, John Tucker, thank you so much for that update. Well, among our most read stories on the Bloomberg is about how BlackRock co-founder, chairman and CEO Larry Fink is calling on the older generation to help out the younger generations, saving for their own futures. That's just one of the topics highlighted in his annual letter that is out today, Tim.
BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager. Bloomberg Wall Street Week host David Weston caught up with BlackRock's Larry Fink just about an hour ago for a wide-ranging conversation. Check out part of that conversation right here.
I believe there are some great areas of private markets that are going to be great investments for retirement. And I would channel that more towards infrastructure, because infrastructure has a long maturity. It has a higher coupon, but it has a lower profile of returns than what I would say other areas of the private markets. So it has a good corridor of returns, but higher probabilities of meeting those returns. And so, yes, we need to be re-looking at how we think about investing, whether that is going to be in private equity or infrastructure. I do believe, we need to be putting more long-dated assets into retirement, and so that you could meet the returns that you need to have the pool of money that you require during retirement.
Something else you mentioned was our longevity, which has increased substantially. We all benefit from that. That's a good thing. Exactly. I'm not complaining. At the same time, should we be encouraging, as you suggest in your letter, people working longer? Should we make it possible, facilitate that? Should we, frankly, increase the age for Social Security?
That is not for me to make a decision, but I think we need to have a conversation. Look, you and I are the same age. Okay, we are working longer. We find purpose in what we do. The founder of Bloomberg, Mike, is still working. I believe for those who can and they find purpose in work, my gosh, work as long as you can. If you find blessings, if you find purpose in other things, do that. But I do believe we need to discuss these opportunities. I don't think the average citizen knows the extent of how much longer we're going to be able to live. So the beauty and the miracles of medicine has allowed us to live, 10, 15, 20 years longer than 2 generations ago. And so, but we haven't changed our system of retirement or our system of Social Security. So the most important thing we need to do, David, is have a conversation. And through that conversation, I think most people are going to elect to do things, maybe working longer or electing to be more involved in how they put their money to work for retirement.
As I say in your letter, you talk a lot about the success of the capital markets, all that they've accomplished. At the same time, you do mention the problem with particularly U.S. debt. You think it's more urgent than any time I think you said you can remember in your lifetime. Put those two things together. To what extent has the success of the capital markets come specifically because we've taken more debt on the public balance sheet? We've shifted debt from private balance sheets to public balance sheets.
No question. Let's just use a statistic, and I think that when I talk about this statistic, I get frightened. In the year 2000, the U.S. deficit was $8 trillion. Today it's $34 trillion. So 23 years later, we increased our deficit by $26 trillion. So for the first 40 years, we increased our deficit to 8 trillion. And in the last 23 years, we increased it by $26 trillion. I think that speaks volumes of what's happening in our country today. The problem with these type of deficits is, and now and I believe higher interest rates for longer, the cost of financing our deficits are going to erode more and more of our disposable income as a country. And I do believe we're getting to a point where our public debt is going to start crowding out private capital, and we're going to have structurally higher interest rates.
What can the private sector do to trigger some action in that regard? I mean, you're the head of the largest asset manager in the world, Larry Fink. It's not just you, but you have some influence. At this point, we have candidates running for president who aren't even talking about this subject.
It's not even a conversation. So in my letter, I talk about the need for more public-private investments. Well, the United States is one of the last countries where we've had private capital investing in our infrastructure. And I believe if we changed our policies, privatized our airports, and privatized maybe our ports, and having private capital investing that, then our public spending could be rededicated to more urgent social needs, more urgent needs, elevating our education, elevating, our issues around Social Security and healthcare. And so I believe the need is to rethink what is the role and responsibility of the public sector for the development of better 21st century infrastructure. We know that we are going to have to digitize our entire economy. We know we're going to have to move forward on decarbonization. These require huge pools of money. Allow the private sector to be part of that. We have this enormous functional capital markets that can provide the capital. We as a country must use it more often and access the role of private sector. And so I think we still, that does not change the course of our deficits, but we can certainly reallocate some of our monies into more urgent issues.
All right, everybody. That, of course, was BlackRock's co-founder, chairman, and CEO Larry Fink talking earlier with Bloomberg Wall Street Week host David Weston. And you can certainly catch that interview. You can find it on the Bloomberg. But also, it is one of our most read stories because Larry Fink, of course, today, Tim, coming out with his annual letter to investors. And again, talking about this looming retirement crisis. I mean, it's certainly something that we talk about a lot on air in terms of a younger generation who are facing student debt. They're also finding that maybe they're with a company that they're not going to get pensions.
Yeah.
And so how do they kind of think about their retirement?
It was interesting. He brought up an example of his parents and realizing after his parents passed just how much money they'd successfully been able to save, working jobs that didn't actually pay relative to, of course, what he does, that much money. And he used that as an example to talk about how it's so much different for people working in today's environment. I like David's question there about whether or not Social Security, the age of Social Security will have to be raised because people are living longer. They're living significantly longer than they were just 70, 80 years ago. So that's a question that policymakers will have to deal with, but that is a question that policymakers do not want to touch because that's not a popular move.
But is it a case of working longer? Is it duration that will improve their retirement picture and their ability to invest? Because I think some of it has to say access to the market or working at a company that hopefully, sets up a 401k and helps you in that process. I think there's a lot of moving parts to that. Or some would argue, critics might say, well, wait a minute, maybe it's a case of putting people in jobs where they're making more money that gives them the ability to potentially buy a house that creates some wealth and also has the ability to invest as well.
I think worth noting, too, and reminding everyone that BlackRock's business is heavily geared toward retirement saving.
World's largest asset manager.
More than half of BlackRock's $10 trillion of assets for clients, they're actually managed for retirement. So it makes sense that this is something he's thinking about and something that he's talking about.
Yeah, in that letter, apparently, he said by mid-century, again, this is Larry Fink of BlackRock saying a sixth of people globally will be over 65. That's up from 1 in 11 in 2019. He cited some data from the United Nations. He said almost half of Americans aged 55 to 65 did not have money in personal retirement accounts, he said, referring to 2022 U.S. Census data. So laying this out. And again, I think about some of the guests that we've had on that have said, we are sorely underfunded when it comes to Americans' retirement, and we're going to start seeing that play out over the next few years.
Not a problem that's unique to the U.S.
No, not at all.
The demographic problem is one that many countries are dealing with right now, and also thinking about how to change legislation around benefits and working age retirement as well. Hey, we're checking in on what's going on with the equity market as we do get just about an hour and a half away from the close right here. The Dow Jones Industrial Average higher by a little more than 0.2%, as is the S&P 500. The NASDAQ Composite up 0.3%, while the NASDAQ 100 index is higher right now by 0.3% as well.
Yeah, stocks bouncing back a little bit, right? We felt like we had a little bit of a breather yesterday. We've had quite a run the week before, the best week for stocks in 2024. So a little bit of a breather. We have a lot of economic news coming your way this week. In particular, we'll get the Fed's preferred read on inflation. That's on Friday when the markets are closed.
You'll be here covering that, though, right? 8:30,
I'll be
Carol?
reading it on the Bloomberg.
Okay, all right.
I will not be here. But the markets won't be open either. So we'll have some delayed reaction to that until the Monday after Easter. But nonetheless, it'll be either confirmation of maybe the Fed's policy up to this point, coming off of last week's Fed meeting, and expectations for maybe 3 rate cuts this year. So we'll see what we get out of that.
One thing to keep in mind, too, is that we are still awaiting the chair of the NTSB right now, who is set to brief media momentarily following the collapse of the Francis Scott Key Bridge down in Baltimore. We will bring you those comments when she does start to speak.
All right. Ahead of that, as we await, we've got a live shot up that we have been watching and monitoring. So as soon as we hear the chair come up to that mic, we will certainly take you there live to listen in. In the meantime, in our studio, Naha Katan of Bloomberg News, national desk reporter, is here and has been monitoring the situation along with us. We've found out some of the, we're getting and we're finding out more about the situation, but as we heard from our own Brendan Murray earlier, that, there's still a lot of details now that we still need to find out.
Yes. So some of the most updated facts, we know that there are 6 people missing and unaccounted for. It's still not clear how many vehicles were on the bridge when it collapsed, but we do know that a Mayday signal, a warning from the ship, helped officials clear the bridge from many, many vehicles and saved a lot of lives. We also know Biden wants the federal government to pay for the bridge. New York and New Jersey may have to take some of the slack from the port of Baltimore.
Nah, I think about infrastructure projects such as these. Certainly our focus right now is on search and rescue, but there are also a lot of questions about what happens in the coming weeks, months, and years after this tragedy. How long does it take to rebuild something like this? How much does it cost? I mean, we're talking infrastructure in a day and age when none of this stuff is done in a short period of time or for, I would argue, not much money.
Right. I mean, there was this question, who's paying for this bridge? Well, the insurance companies aren't going to pay for a multi-billion-dollar bridge, and it's not going to happen overnight either. I know that Biden said every effort will be done to bring it back up as quickly as possible, but this is weeks, months.
Right. He said
more.
We actually played a little soundbite from him from earlier today. And he said, we're going to spend all the federal resources they need as we respond to this emergency, and I mean all the federal resources. But even if you have all the money and stuff, it means bringing in materials, the workers, and we know that none of this stuff, even when it's an emergency and it's a priority, it still takes some time to happen. In the meantime, I think as a nation, we're trying to assess the impact on consumers who use the bridge, right? And as we said, it's an important port on the East Coast. And so we're trying to assess whether or not we start to see any kind of significant challenges to our supply chain, which we are all sensitive to, right? Coming off the pandemic and have felt like, as we've heard from so many of the CEOs and leaders that we have on, that it feels like now that the supply chain has finally settled down here in the U.S.
Yes, and there are analysts who think the West Coast is going to pick up some of the slack here, and also, like I said, New York and New Jersey, they're not up to 100% capacity. They're 20% below where they could be, and so we were told that some of the ships can come this way.
What will you be listening out for? We are awaiting the NTSB chair, Jennifer Homendy, who will be giving a briefing, who's there in Baltimore, and we'll take you there as soon as it happens. But what are you going to be listening out for in particular?
Well, I know they've said there's no sign of terrorism or anything but an accident. I'm curious about how it's possible that really no vehicles were on the bridge. I'm curious. They haven't updated us yet.
Yeah, we do know that the ship was able to send a Mayday signal that perhaps it contributed to that.
Yes.
But I think that's a really good question, too, and hopefully we'll get more info on that in the coming minutes.
Just to remind everybody, you know the story. I'm sure you've heard about it, but of course, a major commuter bridge in Baltimore collapsing after being stuck by a container ship, causing vehicles to plunge into the water and halting shipping traffic at one of the most important ports on the U.S. East Coast. Baltimore Fire Chief James Wallace saying 2 people had been rescued from the scene. This is from an earlier report, and we know we've gotten some updates from that. In the meantime, we've got a live shot we just want to take for those who are watching on Bloomberg Television and on YouTube and, of course, on Bloomberg Originals, that we are awaiting a press conference on the ground there in Baltimore. It will be held by the NTSB chair, Jennifer Homendy. Let's take you there.
Some remarks about today's accident and investigation, and we'll take your questions.
Thank you for joining us. My name is Jennifer Homendy, and I'm the chair of the National Transportation Safety Board. Normally, our investigator in charge, his name is Marcel Muse, M-U-I-S-E. His first name is M-A-R-C-E-L. Marcel Muse is our investigator in charge for this investigation, but just given on scene today, it's very early. I've asked that he remain at the command post to continue what he is doing so that I can brief you on what we're doing so far. Also with me is one of our newest board members. This is Alvin Brown, and this is his training launch. So the NTSB arrived on scene at 6 a.m. To investigate an accident involving a Singapore-registered vessel with the name Dali, D-A-L-I, which made contact with the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore, Maryland, at around 1:30 a.m. this morning. The vessel is 985 feet long. It's a 95,000 gross ton container ship. I've seen information about crew members on board. We still need to verify the numbers of crew on board and their status. Under our Memorandum of Understanding with the Coast Guard, the NTSB is leading this investigation. The Coast Guard will support this investigation. Our Memorandum of Understanding, for example, provides for when an accident involves another mode of transportation and other factors, the NTSB will lead that investigation. Now, I want to thank the U.S. Coast Guard. We have a very cooperative relationship with the U.S. Coast Guard. I particularly want to thank Deputy Commandant for Operations, Vice Admiral Gautier. I want to thank Admiral Gilbreth, who's commander of the 5th Coast Guard District, and Captain O'Connell, who's the sector commander. Before I go on behalf of the NTSB, I want to extend our deepest sympathies to those who have been affected by this significant event. The NTSB, as I mentioned, does many significant transportation events, not just aviation. We do accidents and incidents in marine safety as well, and of course with bridges and other highway infrastructure. And for this, there were many that were affected by this collapse, and our deepest sympathies go out to the families, loved ones, and others who have been affected. I'm going to get questions on fatalities and injuries, which I'm not going to answer. That is not something that the NTSB answers. I will refer you to local authorities on all of that information. What I can tell you is a search and rescue is still underway. So we are very hopeful, and again, our thoughts are with the families and their loved ones. Again, we got here at 6 a.m. And we are standing back to allow the Coast Guard and Search and Rescue to continue their search and rescue operations while we gather information from the command post. There is a lot of information that we can begin to collect. We have a team of 24 on scene, including Member Brown and me. The team of experts include experts in nautical operations, and what they're going to look at and begin to collect is information on vessel operations, safety history, safety record. They'll look at the owner, they'll look at the operator, and they'll look at the operations this day. Today, they will also look at company policy, any sort of safety management system or safety management program will be looked at by them, and our human performance team as well. We have a human performance expert here. We have an engineering team. We have survival factors, and then we have a team here that is getting the recorders. We also have a highway safety team, our team out of the Office of Highway Safety, including structural engineers, bridge experts who will be here and are continuing to come in. We have a few here, and one or two others are coming in the next few hours. We also have our family assistance team on site, and our family assistance team works with those that were affected by a particular event, families, friends, and other loved ones, and they will help them get in touch with the resources they need while also providing them with the information that they need as we move forward with our investigation. This is a team effort. There are a lot of entities right now in the command post, all focused on search and rescue, as they should be. But I do want to, in particular, thank the Coast Guard, the Maryland Transportation Authority Police, the Federal Bureau of Investigations, the Baltimore Fire and Rescue, and the Maryland State Police. I also know that there are others on scene I'm sure I have missed. For example, Army Corps of Engineers is here, a great deal of expertise, and all focused on what is very important, which is the people first. I have been in contact with my counterpart in Singapore. Director Chong is the director of the Transport Safety Investigations Board. The NTSB maintains relationships with our counterparts in other countries often and stay in close communication. So the director and I have been in communication many times before on safety, so it was a good conversation. He is sending some personnel here tomorrow. Also, personnel will be arriving from the Maritime and Port Authority of Singapore, who has the focus of being the regulator in Singapore. Now, it's not a lot of information that I can share at this time, and I know there's a lot of information that seems to be circulating. The NTSB doesn't speculate. We provide facts. And so there isn't a lot we can share right now because the focus has been on the people. However, if you know me, I like to provide information as we can when we're able to verify those facts and be open about that. Transparency is one of our mandates, one of our core values. So please monitor ntsb.gov and X, where we will post when we are having another media briefing. We do have an organizational meeting tonight at 5 o'clock, which I mentioned, to determine where we want to go next on the investigation. But there's a lot of information we need to gather between now and then in the days and weeks that follow. So with that, I am going to take questions. I will call on you. Please state your name and your affiliation. We'll start with Tom and then go over here.
Thank you, Chair Halmody. Tom Costello with NBC News. You spoke of one of the teams within this NTSB structure looking for specifically the reporters on board the ship. Can you speak to what type of reporters may be on board the ship, and what do you hope that what information might they provide?
Yeah, at this time, I will have more information about the recorders tomorrow. We chose not to board the vessel today to allow some time for the search and recovery, which we did not want to interfere with. That is the first and foremost. We do have some information, but we need to verify that information first before I provide that information, before I verify it. So we'll have that information tomorrow, or maybe later tonight if you want to check with me. Yes.
Sabina with ABC News. How long will the search go on for today?
The search is, it's a question on how long the search will go on today. The NTSB is not in charge of the search and rescue operation. That is the U.S. Coast Guard, so I would refer you to the Coast Guard for that information. Yep.
All right, everybody, we're going to continue monitoring that press conference there on the ground in Baltimore with the NTSB chair, Jennifer Hamidi, briefing media after the collapse of the Francis Scott Key Bridge. So obviously, we'll bring you any headlines, but she did point out that they are going to do another meeting later on today at 5 p.m. Wall Street time, and that they will continue to update on the situation.
She also noted that the NTSB has been in touch with their counterpart in Singapore, and they are sending personnel tomorrow. She did mention many times that the search and rescue is still underway in the bridge collapse, and that is the priority right now. In fact, they chose not to board the vessel so they could give room to search and rescue as well as to the Coast Guard to continue with search and rescue.
NTSB, though, obviously, as she said, leading the investigation. Hey, let's get a check, though, on the trade on this Tuesday with an update on that. Back over to John Tucker.
All right, the major averages, Carol, still higher right now. The advance for the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ Composite Index approaching 10% since the start of the year. After the two-day pullback, stocks, again, they were advancing today. And the best performing stock in the S&P 500 right now, McCormick, it is up over 9% right now, closing in on 10%. Again, that's the best performing stock in the S&P 500 after delivering an encouraging sales update. Worst performing stock right now, that belongs to United Parcel Service, 8% lower. Their revenue target beat estimates, but Wall Street analysts kind of underwhelmed by the performance there. S&P 500, 8 points higher right now. That's up 0.2%. 52.26 on the index. The Dow Jones Industrial Average up 67 points, a rise of 0.2%. The NASDAQ right now 40 points higher. That is up 0.25%. And we check the markets for you all day long, right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Carol and Tim.
All right, John Tucker, so appreciate it. Hey, John, of course, breaking down the trade. Don't forget, we did get some economic points earlier today, some data points. It's a busy, chock-full week, if you will, of economic data points. We had U.S. consumer confidence holding steady in March. Americans were sanguine about their current situations, Tim, but grew slightly more pessimistic about the outlook. And then new orders placed with U.S. factories for durable goods, that rose in the month of February for the first time in 3 months. So suggesting that firms are somewhat optimistic about the direction of the U.S. economy.
On that, gold earlier extended Monday's gain ahead of key U.S. inflation data, which we get on Friday. That could provide traders with a firmer view on when the Fed will start cutting interest rates. Gold did pair most of those gains, but still near an all-time high of more than $2,200 per ounce.
All right, so with a look at kind of the broader macro environment and also the precious metal space, we welcome the president of World Markets at Everbank. He is Chris Gaffney. He's here in studio. Everbank, by the way, noting on its website, $36.2 billion in assets and $27.9 billion in deposits as of the end of 23. Chris, nice to have you in studio. How are you?
Great, thanks. It's great to be here.
Well, it's great to have you here. And I have to start, you guys think about the broad macro and things kind of coming at us. And I am curious, If you have any thoughts about what's going on in Baltimore right now, we're looking once again very deeply and closely at U.S. supply chains, and I'm just curious if you have any thoughts in terms of your world and how you think about it might impact potentially if we see some supply chain disruptions in terms of higher prices, inflation, and we know the story here.
Exactly. So, it will definitely lead to, if anything, higher inflation and a higher inflation reading with supply chain disruptions, which could lead the Fed to, stop rate cuts or actually pause on their planned rate cuts. Right now, we believe that the Fed pretty much has a predetermined rate cut path, and it's really looking for reasons to knock them off their path instead of reasons to cut. And I think June is definitely on the table, and they're going to look to cut in June.
And how many do you think the Fed will do this
Well,
year?
they're still saying 3, and
not every member of the Fed,
right? And they pulled back a little bit on their 2025. I think it's really dependent on where they believe inflation, where this next PCE report comes in. They ignored the last 2, and they seem to be tending to look to let inflation run hotter for longer.
Because they believe those longer-term inflation expectations are anchored, right? They're sticking to that.
And they are in kind of a situation where, with the amount of debt that we have here, they need to lower interest rates, especially before it really has an impact on the global economy. And
You're talking about the cost of servicing that debt.
Exactly. That cost of servicing debt is going to take more and more of the budget, of the U.S. budget. So by lowering interest rates, they'll have less debt service cost.
It's not one of their mandates, Chris.
I know. It's
hate to remind you, but
strong labor and
I didn't hear Powell say this at all during the press conference last
week. An extra mandate
it's in
there.
The background, and I do believe that.
And many people have come on and said, U.S. debt. All of a sudden, you go back 10 years, 20 years. It's like every conversation was about it.
Right.
It's gone to the wayside, but
Larry
it is
Fink
kind of
brought it up this morning.
He did. He did.
And by cutting rates, they'll ease that debt service. And I really think that from what Powell was saying in his presser, they're going to let inflation run a little hotter. I think they'll adjust their inflation target. I don't think 2% is realistic, and I think they'll adjust their inflation target up. What that does to the markets, is 2.5%, 3% inflation going to kill the markets? I don't think so, and I think they continue to lower rates.
Why do they have to make that adjustment? Is it because the macro factors say we're in a very different environment post-pandemic?
I think this is sticky inflation, and I think the interest rates are going to settle at a higher level than the market's expecting right now. Because of the higher inflation, the stickier inflation, and
because of macro. Is it what is it that's changed in our inflationary environment?
Yeah, I think that we had the supply chain interruptions, but I think in general the economy is doing well. The labor market is very resilient. Consumers are resilient. We've got very strong U.S. consumers. They don't seem to be adjusting their spending. Confidence, while the longer-term confidence is questionable, U.S. consumers are still very strong. So they're going to continue spending. We see services continuing to, inflationary pressures on services. Any supply chain interruption, that's going to add to inflationary pressures also.
So let's get to gold and precious metals. Yeah. Given the narrative that you just gave, why are we seeing gold near an all-time high?
Well, absolutely. It's kind of an inflation hedge. Mm-hmm. Traditionally it's shown as an inflation hedge. But what we see on Everbank's World Market Desk is individual investors concerned about the global economy. They're using it as a uncertainty hedge or a catastrophe hedge. And we're seeing people come in, individual investors come in and want to own a hard asset. One of the things that propelled gold to the record levels was central bank buying. And central banks were switching their reserves out of U.S. dollars into precious metal, into gold. And I think some of the consumers are starting to do that also. And wanting that hard asset, wanting the diversification, outside of just owning their traditional asset classes.
Chris, because you do see so much on that platform, quantify it for us. Is it back to levels we saw pre-pandemic? Is it, give us an idea of, if you're seeing buying, how much has it kind of picked up in terms of frequency?
Well, the physical buying isn't quite back to the levels we saw, post-pandemic. We went through a silver shortage and we saw spreads on the physical silver widen dramatically. They're not back there yet. The spreads are narrower. Demand is up though, and we're seeing more and more demand. And talking to individuals, it's more about concern about where the global economy is and the U.S. economy. The valuations on the equity markets, seeing maybe some overvaluation there, and really pushing people to they want to have something to hold. So we're seeing the physical precious metals. We haven't seen so much the inflows into the ETFs. It's more the physical demand.
Interesting.
Okay, what about demand for Bitcoin?
That's what I'm saying.
Like, because when
Same thing?
Yeah, well, when we talk about, some people come on our program and say, our bull case for Bitcoin is that this is literally digital gold.
Right.
Do you believe it is?
No. I still
Fixed supply.
Yes.
We know how much is there.
Yeah, it's not controlled by any certain central government like fiat currencies are. So
Can't melt
it
it
does
into
share
jewelry.
some of those. It shares some of those. Is it a hard asset though? Is it, where is it? Where's it stored? There's question marks. We haven't had a Mt. Gox in a while, but questions about that it's in the ether. So I think for some investors, they feel it's an alternative to gold. I think the jury's out. I think it's got to establish there's a long history with gold. And so I think that is seen as the safe haven, the uncertainty hedge. People can trust that it's a hard asset. It's there in their portfolio. I still feel Bitcoin is more speculation, especially with the volatility it has.
You guys don't offer it on your
more
platform, do you?
No, we do not. We do not deal in cryptos.
Yet?
We do not deal in. I mean, it's we're a bank, so we're not encouraged to deal in the crypto sphere. Right
there are traditional banks getting into crypto. Sorry, go ahead, Carol.
No. Well, I was just going to save 30 seconds because you guys are a bank and you do see so much. I mean, how do you describe the economy? And forgive me because we only do have about 30 seconds left.
Not a problem. So I think the U.S. economy remains strong, mainly on the back of very strong and resilient U.S. consumers. Labor market's still good. So we'll see the higher interest rates have not had an impact yet, and I think the Fed is still going to go ahead and cut and trying to get us to this Goldilocks scenario where they can cut rates and still keep inflation down while a strong labor market. So
no stress points, real quickly.
Oh, there's the debt levels and on both consumer and government is really the stress level, and that's the real question mark. And then of course the geopolitical tensions.
So appreciate it. Thank you so much and for going along with us because we know we had a lot of breaking news. Chris Gaffney, thank you. President of World Markets at Everbank, joining us in studio. Coming up next on TV, The Close, and we're going to continue on radio. This is Business Week.
In case you missed
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, everybody, you are listening and watching Bloomberg Business Week. We're just about 1 hour away from the closing bell on this Tuesday, March 26, 2024. Carol Masser along with Tim Stenevec. And folks, we got a lot coming up in the next couple of hours, including we've got a couple of guests from the C-suite. We're going to hear from the CEO of UPS, just as Wall Street is underwhelmed by the company's 2026 target.
We also got the Chief People and Global Sustainability Officer over at Siemens. She's going to stop by to talk about the climate crisis and what companies' role is when it comes to that crisis.
Plus, we want WeWork, or so says WeWork co-founder Adam Newman and partners.
We want it back.
That's right. Putting in a bid to buy the bankrupt company for more than $500 million. So we're going to break down that and see what they are up to.
Meantime, President Biden erases Donald Trump's lead in blue wall states that he needs to win. We're going to go through the data, which is exclusive to Bloomberg News.
Yeah, we're going to wrap up with someone who spent 2 decades in the CIA. She's written about it. She became the chief of disguise, even fooled a president once about her identity.
Do you think she's going to be in disguise when she joins us?
I have no idea, but we'll find out. We'll have to ask. We're like, is this you or is this... Anyway, the author of In True Face, she's going to join us a little bit later on. First up, though, let's get back to that trading day. He's not in disguise. This is
that really?
The
Well,
real John
they
Tucker.
did force me to wear makeup today. So
A little disguise.
A little disguise. A little better looking than usual. The major stock averages, a little better looking than usual, pushing modestly higher. Investors looking to Friday. By the way, that's a market holiday in the release of the Fed's preferred inflation gauge. In the S&P 500 right now, 7 of the 11 major industry groups, they are higher. You have communication services and consumer discretionary leading the way. Those are home to Google parent Alphabet, Meta Platforms, and Tesla. Well, meantime, Peter Shear at Academy Securities is worried the markets are behaving something like meme stocks.
You watch during the course of the day and you see kind of these sharp declines, sharp rallies on, I think, very little volume. So I think that's made it very difficult. We've come to an age where it's clearly not meme stocks, but you have some of these very large market cap stocks trading quite volatile.
First day of trading on the NASDAQ for Trump Media and Technology Group. Shares up 44% right now. Also the most expensive stock to short, given the number of investors betting that the stock will decline. As for the major averages, S&P 500, 10 points higher. That's up 0.2%. 52.27 on the index. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, 82 points higher. That's up 0.2%. And right now, the Nasdaq Composite Index up 45 points. That's a rise of 0.3%. 16,430 on the index. And we check the markets for you all day long, right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Carol and Tim.
Thank you, Mr. Tucker.
You're welcome.
So appreciate it. Manners all around. That's what we do.
Something different for us.
All right, we got to get to another story that is among our most read today.
Adam Neumann, the WeWork co-founder who left the company after its failed IPO attempt, is back. He and several partners submitted an offer to buy WeWork out of bankruptcy for more than $500 million, putting one of the tech world's most controversial founders just one step closer. Should I say one barefoot step closer to regaining control of his long-troubled startup?
Nicely said.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Hannah Miller and Crystal C. write about Newman's attempt to buy back the startup he once controlled. It is one of the most read stories on the Bloomberg. I went back about 10 years ago, and I think it was a cover story for Bloomberg Business Week about how they wanted to redo everything, basically. Joining us right now.
How did that work out?
Here we are today.
Okay.
We're buying back the company and bringing it out of bankruptcy, or so they hope. Bloomberg News Deals reporter Crystal C. She's here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio. This is a story that has been going on for some time. All right, so what do we know here?
Yeah, it's a story that keeps on giving. It's actually the first story that I cover when I moved to New York.
Is it really?
2019.
Full circle.
It is a full circle moment.
And it was a story before that.
It was a story before that. I was covering the failed IPO attempt in 2019, and that eventually became a SPAC, which I also covered. And now it's filed for bankruptcy, and then Adam Neumann is trying to come back. What we know so far is that he had put in a bid with a group of financial partners, we don't know who they are, trying to get this company back. And as far as we know, the bid is over $500 million, which is significantly lower than what it used to be. It was over $50 billion at one point.
At its heights, right? Yeah.
Right. At its height, when SoftBank was pouring all the money in there. So it's nowhere near that, but out of bankruptcy is still quite a big ticket size.
I mean, it's remarkable, the full circle that, if this were to happen, the full circle that it would be. Remind us what Adam Neumann has done since being pushed out of WeWork following the failed IPO, because it sounds like he's pretty good at raising money, at least from one prominent venture capitalist.
Right. Other than walking around barefoot, he
Yes.
has been raising capital, and the vehicle he is using to buy this is his now real estate firm called Flow. And again, it's another real estate venture from Adam Neumann. He's going back to what he knows. And Anderson Horowitz was the backer of this firm. So he's very good at getting like the powerhouse in the venture capital world, SoftBank, and now this into funding his venture. And like this is round two, and we'll see what happens.
It's interesting. Are there other parties interested in WeWork and what's left of it?
So this is so far the most prominent bit that we had covered. This is a court-mandated bankruptcy procedure. So whenever there are anyone that comes out, we will know. They will have to disclose it. There are no one else other than Adam Neumann that would generate this kind of attention.
What are the assets that WeWork has right now? What's left? What have they sold off?
So there are still real estate leases. They're real estate assets. And if you remember the controversy in the very beginning of this IPO, it was that Adam Neumann owned some of these property and he was leasing it to WeWork, right? So a lot of...
Hey, look, a great business if you can do it, Carol.
The devil is always in the details,
great
is
biz.
it not? Yeah.
Right, so that was some of the controversy, and there are WeWork still operating in many cities, including in New York City. So those properties still have ongoing leases. So those are the things that the new buyer will take over, as well as all the assets that's in there.
How valuable are those leases? Or like, I'm just thinking about, post-pandemic, we rethink how we work. Although in some ways, if you think about WeWork, maybe they were onto something, this idea of people needing temporary working facilities, right? Like, and having access to them. So it's kind of interesting that maybe some of the core of the idea made some sense, but it went through a lot of different iterations, if you will, to where it is kind of today. But the value of those leases, have they come down in value because of the pandemic?
So there are actually more liability in WeWork than there are in asset, which is not uncommon for a bankrupt company. And they have about 15 billion in asset, 19 billion in liability. So Adam Neumann's fund flow actually is nowhere close to that size, and I mean the math doesn't work that way anyway. So I think it's very, very interesting who he's pulling in and as his financial partners in this bid. For 500 million, his fund flow is worth 350, roughly. So they will.
Meaning that's how much cash he has, or meaning that's
so how much
because the
money
valuation
he has,
is higher, right?
So Flow has raised $350 million. So even if he put his entire fund into WeWork, he still needs someone else to write the equity check or like get a bank to like fund it. However way he's going to fund it. Like I think it's just really interesting. And he had said actually in the statement that says a coalition of half a dozen financial partners. And I think we're going to just do more reporting and find out who these people are.
Okay, before you do that, can you just remind us about when he left WeWork, just how much money he was able to get as a result of that deal?
Yeah, that was another controversy, that he was actually getting paid up billions of dollars to leave the company. That was before they tried to pull off the SPAC listing. So for a brief period of time, WeWorks was a SPAC target, and
of course it was.
I think he was paid
a little bit of everything.
I don't remember off the top of my head, but it's definitely in the billions.
He did pretty well for somebody who was forced to leave the company.
It's pretty amazing. So obviously as you guys continue to report it out, you want to find out more about who's actually involved in this. I mean, that says something to who are kind of the caliber of the investors, right, who step up to be a part of that. That will say something.
Yeah, that's right. And it also will tell you kind of the enigma of Adam Neumann's relationship, like how far it extends. We knew that he's very good in venture, maybe like he had some like real estate backing, or is he now tapping into like different pockets of money like a sovereign wealth fund? So I think just on that just personality angle is very interesting who he will tap.
Just 20 seconds. Do people think that this is a viable business going forward?
I think, like you said, like the whole real estate, commercial real estate and return to office has been a huge hit to companies like WeWork. So is the business model going to stand for another 5-10 years? We'll see.
I do have a friend, Carol, who works out of a WeWork.
Yeah.
And a few years ago, I went to his office, and the kombucha was flowing. The snacks were there.
Is the kombucha still
there? Went back there for a party before Christmas this year. The kombucha was no longer flowing.
It's a different kind of WeWork.
It is same office, different kind of WeWork. Yeah.
It's called a bankrupt.
That is true.
WeWork. Crystal, thanks so much. We appreciate the update. Crystal C., she's deals reporter at Bloomberg News here in our interactive broker studio. You can find this story among the most read on the Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg.
Well, as many regular listeners and viewers know, Bloomberg News has teamed up with Morning Consult to release monthly polls that focus on voters in key battleground states. And after 5 months of mostly consistent leads for former President Trump, President Joe Biden has gained ground against Trump in 6 of 7 key swing states, and significantly so, Carol, in at least 2 of them.
Yeah, the results make for the Democrats' strongest position yet in a monthly Bloomberg News Morning Consult poll. The move in the president's direction follows his State of the Union address that rallied Democrats and seemed to mitigate concerns about Biden's age. So let's get to it. Let's find out a little bit more about the findings, dig a little bit into it. Laura Davison is politics reporter for Bloomberg News. She's been on this story all day, and she joins us from Washington, D.C. All right, so Laura, put it into context and break it down in terms of what seems to be improving numbers for President Biden.
Yeah, this poll has been going on since October, and this is the first time we've really seen Biden reverse his fortunes here. Trump has, he started out with a strong lead and has been able to expand that generally month to month. So, Trump still leads Biden in this poll across the swing states, 47-43 for Biden. But you saw this month some significant increases. So Biden is now leading Trump in Wisconsin. And he is neck and neck in both Pennsylvania and Michigan. That is what they call the blue wall on this sort of the upper Midwest industrial area that is Biden has really been concentrating on. He's been there multiple times over the past several months on both campaign events as well as for official visits, touting his economic policies. He did a lot to court the endorsement, which he did receive, of the UAW, United Auto Workers. So you're really seeing, kind of his, campaign strategy play into where he's actually seeing some bump in the polls there.
Okay, well, speaking of campaign strategy, Laura, is the takeaway for people who work on the Biden campaign from a poll like this, have a State of the Union-like event every single month until the election?
If they could do that every month, they probably would. But the key takeaway here is that the State of the Union was a win for Biden. He was able to get some good coverage out of that and came out looking strong. This was right after the month there was a lot of concerns about his age with the Her report there. So that was a helpful thing. Also, remember, right before this poll went into the field, another important thing that happened is both Biden and Trump clinched their respective parties' nominations. So that really sort of solidified the race for a lot of people that hadn't really been paying attention, that hadn't been focused on, is it really going to be Trump again? Is it really going to be Biden again? That all happened really in the same week, and has, I think, crystallized the race for a lot of voters who are like, okay, these are your choices.
We have spent so much this week also talking about former President Donald Trump, some of his legal issues, if you will, and I just wondered if that played into any of these poll results at all as well.
Yeah, what's been interesting about the legal results or his legal woes is that it has generally galvanized his supporters. What the poll shows is that once, if and when there is a conviction, that's when that really starts to damage Biden. That you have a majority of people in swing states who say they won't, or sorry, damage Trump. People and a majority of people say they will not vote for Trump if he's convicted of a crime. That is really thrown into question. One, if there will ever be a conviction, and two, if the timing of these court cases will ever get to that stage. By the time the election rolls around, there's been lots of jockeying in delaying these trials. Just earlier this week, it was announced that the hush money trial would start on April 15th. So that's the quickest moving one. We'll see how that plays out over the course of the next several months.
Hey, Laura, one of the things that I found most fascinating about this poll, and I encourage everybody to read the results because it's chock full of information. We can't get to all of it during this interview, but was that it seems like voters in some of these swing states are finally starting to say that they're feeling better about the economy.
Yes, this was also a surprising finding of, the economy is still the top concern by and large across voters when they have to pick one issue. But this poll showed that there's fewer people that are concerned about the economy and the direction of the economy. Interestingly, immigration seems to be the issue that's sort of maybe peeling people away a little bit. But that both, kind of bears out that people are feeling better. Things like prices have stabilized. There's, kind of what the economic data has been showing for months. People are actually starting to feel. So that is a helpful sign for Biden. But it depends kind of what is that second issue that people are then caring about. Trump still polls better on immigration. If it's an issue like abortion, that's a strength for Biden.
Hey, one of the trends I feel like, Laura, that we have been dealing with in the most recent political cycle, especially when it comes to the presidential cycles, is it's not a vote for somebody, it's a vote against somebody. And that was also asked about within this poll. What were the results on that front?
Yeah, so for Trump voters, they are voting for Trump. The vast majority of his say, it's not a vote against Joe Biden, they vote affirmatively for Trump. That support is a little bit weaker when you get to Biden voters, that you have more voters saying, still a majority, about 60% say they're voting for Biden, but about 40% saying they are voting against the other guy. If you talk to the Biden allies, they're like, look, we'll take a vote as a vote. It doesn't matter, sort of what the intention is behind it. But that does suggest his support is a little softer and, is a concern when this is, going to be a turnout election. However, Democrats say, look, Donald Trump is the best thing that ever happened to get Democrats to turn out to vote. So there's a question there about, how motivating will Trump be? And especially, as people really start to tune into the election, some of that fear and anger among Democrats may get stirred up in the next several months.
We got to talk about RFK Jr. and third-party candidates here, because RFK Jr. is scheduled to announce his pick for vice president today in Oakland. What did the polling tell you about the equation when third-party candidates are included?
Yeah, so RFK Jr. consistently has been polling about 9-10% in a matchup that includes Trump, Biden, Cornel West, Jill Stein, and fill in the blank, whoever you want. And he's polling roughly equally between both Democrats and Republican from Trump and Biden here. So that's somewhat of a concern potentially for both campaigns, particularly if that distribution starts to shift in one party's favor or the other. 10% of the vote in swing states is a pretty significant portion. In some states like Michigan, it's even higher. So that, it will really play out, especially as people get more acquainted with his campaign, kind of what type of voter is he appealing to. The Kennedy name, of course, is being a Democratic name, but a lot of his rhetoric is more appealing to certain factions of the Republican Party. He has this event ongoing right now in Oakland. He's about to announce his vice presidential pick. And a lot of the things that the speakers are talking about this event, sounds more like something you'd hear at a Trump rally.
All right, and then also one of the things in this poll also was asked about, and that has to do with tax policy. What did we find out about that, especially when it comes to those swing states?
We found out that the swing state voters really, really, really want to tax wealthy people. And this is, wealthy sort of broadly defined. So billionaires, about 70% of people in swing states want to tax billionaires more, but also people making more than $400,000. So that's sort of kind of Biden's proposal broadly, is to increase taxes on households making $400,000 or more. When you kind of net that out, that's about 5% of the top 5% of earners. So that's something you're seeing a lot of support for. However, those same voters that say that they want to tax the rich are also saying they trust Donald Trump more when it comes to tax issues. So that's a weird, interplay we're seeing of, people say they like Biden's policies, but they like Trump doing it.
All right, going to leave it there. Always love to get these updates on these polls that have been coming out and that we've been doing since October. There's a lot of information, and, it's interesting to see kind of this tweak, if you will, in President Biden's favor. So more to come. All right, Laura Davison, thank you so much. Politics reporter for Bloomberg News.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. The major stock averages, they are higher right now, not the best levels of the session. Among the things in the driver's seat, quarter-end positioning for stock traders. The spice maker McCormick, the best performing stock right now, the S&P 500, that is up 10%. Worst performing stock, that belongs to United Parcel Service. Those shares down over 7%. Supply chain issues rising again. General Motors says it is working to reroute vehicle shipments that have come through the port of Baltimore. And Ford Motors CFO telling Bloomberg they're going to have to divert parts to other ports along the East Coast or elsewhere in the country. And Trump Media and Technology Group, ticker symbol DJT, shares right now, they are up 39% on the first day of trading on the NASDAQ. Overall, the S&P 500, 7 points higher. That's up 0.1%. We're at 52.25 on the index. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, 86 points higher. That's up 0.2%, 39,399. And the NASDAQ Composite Index up 21 points, a rise of about 0.1%. We check the markets for you all day long, right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Carolyn, Tim.
Thank you, John Tucker.
Oh, you're so very welcome, Tim.
Really appreciate that.
The Polite Show continues right here on Bloomberg Radio.
It's a little too polite for me.
Yeah, we got 90 minutes for John Tucker to...
We'll break it out in the next hour, okay?
Hey, well, it's time for another edition of Bloomberg Plugged In. It's your weekly look at EVs. The founder of China's world-beating battery manufacturer is pressing ahead with expansion in the face of a global slowdown in EV sales growth. We're talking about Robin Zhang, president and chairman of Contemporary Amperex Technology Company, better known as CATL. In his first interview with an international news outlet since 2020, he's not worried about overcapacity and, in fact, will crank up output of its more technologically advanced products.
All right, for more, let's bring in Ed Ludlow. He's co-host of Bloomberg Technology on Bloomberg Television, and he joins us right now from San Francisco. You know, Ed, first of all, hello. What I love about these kind of stories is it maybe brings our Bloomberg audience or draws attention to a company that maybe we don't talk about a lot, but maybe we should. Tell us a little bit about this company and size and scope and the significance of it.
Well, this was a genuinely rare interview. You know, Zhang's not spoken since 2020, as we point out in the story, but the reality is that CATL, even if it's not a household name here in America, they are the most important battery maker in the world, maker of battery cells that go into EVs. You know, in China, they account for 50% of the entire domestic market, and worldwide, they account for kind of, on average, around 40%. You know, they have deals with Tesla, principally. So if you're a Tesla owner, there's, you know, an important relationship there. But also, they have some sort of relationship with, like, a dozen or so other automakers here in the Western world. So if you're the owner of a battery electric car, CATL is relevant to you.
And I'm fascinated with this idea that he said that he was able to really get the battery charge time down to 10 minutes using technology. I mean, this is like, what do we know about the technology to be able to do this? And is that really possible? Are we talking about a traditional EV battery that in some cases can take, what, you know, close to an hour to charge fully, depending on the type of charger you're using, or even longer if you're using chargers at home?
So ultimately, it comes down most of the time to battery chemistry, although I would point out one of the biggest lessons I've learned in the last 6 years of being in Silicon Valley is the software component of a battery pack is really important. The automaker is responsible for that. But we know CATL for LFP batteries, lithium iron phosphate, principally, but they're looking at other cell chemistries, and a big part of this interview is Zhang talking about the work that CATL is doing with Tesla. You know, they are a major supplier to Tesla, and they work very closely. There are lots of different ways that they're doing that hand in hand, but one is to experiment with different cell chemistries. One potential future use would be sodium iron phosphate, which basically works better in colder temperatures. And, you know, by working so closely with the actual automaker itself, Tesla, you can kind of prove the technology works rather than just the design of a battery, work with the company that's making the EV it will go into.
Why is he talking now, after almost 4 years of being silent?
Good question. I think that it's a kind of getting out there and being bullish when times are actually pretty difficult. There's something really phenomenal that's happened with CATL, that if you go to 2023's revenue compared to even 2020, the year the world fell apart because of the pandemic, sales have grown 8x or jumped 8 times. But in that same period of time, CATL's market cap has decreased significantly. So they're confronting a world where they are easily the biggest standalone maker of cells that go into EVs, but the demand for the end market's just not there. We know there's softness in EV demand in domestic China, here in the United States. There's still growth in EV sales, just slower growth than we've had in the past 2 calendar years. So my take is that he's kind of going out there and saying, I'm doubling down, I'm investing, I'm going to boost my capacity. And if you look at the performance of CATL shares overnight, jumped about 5%, it worked.
Ed, is this a company that has to be worried about trade tensions with the U.S.? Does it have to be worried about a Trump administration potentially coming in 2025?
It's really complicated. So basically, the provisions of the Inflation Reduction Act and the associated IRS rules mandate that if you, the consumer, want $7,500 tax credit, then that car, that EV you want to buy, has to comply with rules. Those rules include every single component having a limited quantity or proportion of Chinese-made parts, basically, and also the ownership of the companies that make those parts. That makes life problematic for CATL. But there's also a political story that's a lot deeper. So if you read the Bloomberg News reporting, what CATL does in another business model is license its technology. Ford is a good example. So it says to Ford, we license you the blueprints for how we make our batteries and the batteries themselves. You just do it yourself. Therefore, there isn't really the same concern. But in Washington, D.C., that hasn't gone down very well with Republican lawmakers, for example, who basically accuse Ford of using a Trojan horse. Even though CATL is not actually making the batteries for Ford, they're licensing the technology, and that's been regarded as a backdoor for a Chinese company to get into a U.S. supply chain.
Well, fascinating, and again, really kind of opening up a window into who this company is and why we need to kind of keep a watch on them, no doubt about it. Ed, thank you so much. Ed Ludlow, co-host of Bloomberg Technology, joining us right there from our San Francisco bureau. Catch him and Caroline Hyde every day from 11 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg TV.
I did it, Carol. I used your favorite function on the Bloomberg terminal to look at the supply chain. And the biggest customer for CATL, Tesla, 11.6% of the company's revenue comes from Tesla. And then you have Geely in there, NIO, Volkswagen, Nissan, Honda, and more.
Yeah, as he said, what was it, 50% of the market in China and about 40% of the market around the globe. So obviously a significant player. Hey guys, we're going to just switch gears. Watching shares of UPS, they're down about 7.5% in today's trade. This after the company came out and says it expects sales and profits to grow over the next 3 years as the courier overcomes soft demand for package delivery coming out of the pandemic. Investors, though, skeptical of those targets that whether or not they are really within reach. And so that is why you see the stock under pressure right now. Now, in an interview on Bloomberg Radio and Television, the CEO of UPS, Carol Tomé, with Bloomberg's Romain Bostic and Alex Steele. Let's listen in.
I want to welcome our Bloomberg TV and radio audiences. One company that we're watching today is UPS. The company expects sales and profit to grow over the next 3 years. The company outlined its new strategy during an investor presentation this morning, projecting revenue to grow by as much as $114 billion and adjusted operating margin above 13% by 2026. Joining us now for more on this plan is Carol Tomé, CEO of UPS. Carol, thank you so much for joining us. I know it's been quite a busy day. I got to ask, the stock is down almost 8%. Investors not liking it. Why?
Well, Alex, if I could answer that question, I'd probably have a different job. I was really proud of our team today and the outline that we provided to grow our company, our revenues and our margin, and invest in the future. So I'd love to talk about our plans and how we're going to create value over the long term.
So first of all, that was a great answer. Second of all, I think to the point, what some analysts were pointing out was a couple-fold. One is that you're going to have to maybe raise prices in order to meet some of these estimates in a tough growth environment. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that. So give us your thoughts on that first.
I'm happy to. So we divided our growth into 3 different segments: the U.S., international, and then supply chain solutions, with an overarching theme of growth in healthcare. And healthcare logistics is probably the most exciting growth opportunity we have ahead of us. The addressable market, well, it's big, $152 billion, although we're focusing on the complex side of healthcare logistics, which is about $82 billion. Last year, our healthcare logistics revenue was $10 billion. Over the next 3 years, we plan to double that to $20 billion. So that's one way we're going to grow without raising prices. We're just going to lean into an opportunity that values our end-to-end complex logistics network. If we come back to the United States, we plan to grow revenue by about $10 billion. Part of that will come from volume growth, and part of that will come from higher revenue per piece. But on the revenue per piece, don't be confused by the growth there. Part of that is leaning into parts of the market that really value our end-to-end network, like small and medium-sized businesses. And those packages tend to have a higher revenue per piece than other packages. Yeah. We also are leaning into the B2B space, and those packages tend to have a higher revenue per piece. Yeah. And then finally, well, we do tend to raise prices every year. We have something called a general rate increase. Our general rate increase for 2024 is 5.9%. Now, I don't think we'll hold all of that, but we should hold about 50% of that.
I am curious, though, Carol, when you talk about those growth targets and those ambitions, where are those customers coming from? Are they basically with one of your rivals now, and you think that maybe you can sort of poach some of those people? Or are these new folks that maybe aren't really using a shipping and logistics service right now that will now somehow find you at UPS?
So the answer is yes to all above. So if I think about healthcare logistics, it's highly fragmented with tens of thousands of players in that space. We have an opportunity to grow into the space because we have an end-to-end solution coupled with cold chain packaging, ultra cold chain packaging. So we are the best in the world in that, and we can aggregate this fragmented market into an end-to-end solution. If we think about growth outside the United States, the addressable market that we're going after is about $50 billion. And that's held by other players that you can think of, like the largest player in the world outside the United States, for example. So there will be a share shift opportunity as we continue to sell across our end-to-end portfolio. And this really differentiates us from many of the players in our market because we believe in orchestration.
Yeah.
Because we have an end-to-end network, we can change the mode that you need to ship your product the most efficiently.
So that's the sales growth story going forward. Talk to me a little bit about the bottom line, about margins. You've already been in cost-cutting mode. We've seen at least announcements of some of those layoffs here. What more is coming? What more should investors expect?
Yes, so last year, as you know, the small package market shrunk from where it had been the previous year. And so we looked at that reality and said we've got to right-size our business to meet the size of our company. So we did make some decisions to do just that under an operating model of fit to serve. Moving past that, though, is the very exciting opportunity that we have to drive out cost through automation. Do you know that we have over 1,000 buildings in the United States? And many of these buildings were built 50 years ago, 60 years ago. We're 117 years old as a company. And as we looked at the buildings, we said, my gosh, we have an opportunity actually to consolidate buildings that aren't automated into brand new automated buildings and drive productivity. So we call this Network of the Future, which we announced this morning, and it's very exciting. We will have, by the end of our initial phase, we will have 400 buildings that are fully automated. And with this automation, well, we're going to drive out cost. We'll drive out $3 billion of cost between now and 2028, and about half of that will be realized by 2026.
Carol, so the automation doesn't necessarily just mean layoffs?
Automation is automating inside of the buildings. It means everything. Using automation for route optimization, using automation to change addresses, using automation to change to sort packages, of course, using automation to actually put packages into package cars and then deliver it. So it's end-to-end automation. And with end-to-end automation, yeah, there's a productivity opportunity, which means we don't need as many people to move the packages inside of the buildings that we have today. But there's an opportunity for those people to do something else. So as we lean to automation and technology, particularly generative AI, there's an opportunity to move off of the floor of the building and go into the control rooms.
So then going back to the healthcare, well, I guess in general, you had mentioned that revenue targets will include $6 billion of inorganic growth. Where is the priority for that? Where would you like to be spending most of that money?
So most of that $6 billion is in what we call a pipeline. We've been actively looking at opportunities to expand our healthcare logistics portfolio. In fact, we've made a couple of acquisitions recently, one, BOMI, the second, MNX Global Logistics. Both of these acquisitions enhanced our capabilities, particularly in cold chain. So as we think about opportunities going forward, we're going to look for those enabling acquisitions. They're all around the world. It's like a string of pearls. There's no large acquisition, but a string of acquisitions that will continue to enhance our capabilities and allow us to grow. So the number wasn't made up. It's based on a pipeline that we're actively working.
Carol, I do want to ask you a bit of a broader question here, just about the health of our supply chains here in the U.S. As you know, there was a horrific and tragic accident overnight in Baltimore, the loss of life. But of course, now a lot of people looking at the potential economic toll, the need to reroute ships, the need to reroute ground transportation, rail transportation in order to get things off the ship. Is UPS in any way affected by the collapse of that bridge?
Well, our hearts goes out to those who were affected. It was just a horrific accident. We have checked in on all of our UPS folks in that area, and all of our folks are safe, thank goodness. Because we do have an end-to-end global supply chain, we can reroute products to different ports around the world. We can also move it off of the air, off of the ocean and put it into the air. We'll help reroute the world. We do this as a matter of course. We can.
And so for the customers that, your existing customers that depend on you, depend on UPS, and more importantly, the folks at the end of that line who also depend on getting delivery of those things for medicine and other things that are critical here.
Yeah.
What type of disruptions, if at all, should they expect?
Well, I can't speak to the specific accident because I don't know the cargo on the carrier. But when it comes off the carrier, we'll help to get it routed. And because there'll need to be a repair, obviously, you can reroute ocean freight to ports like in Savannah or up the Northeast coast. So we've got a presence everywhere, so we can assist in that.
Carol, before we let you go, sort of staying on the macro theme, what's your take on the U.S. economy? How are we doing?
So from our perspective, the U.S. economy is very resilient. And the good news from a year ago is that inflation rates have come down because inflation actually had an impact to our business, a negative impact. Think about this, when inflation rates were 6% or higher, particularly in the area of food, more and more consumers' wallets were going to food purchases, and those purchases, well, they don't ship through our small package network. So as inflation has come down now to 3%, and the Fed has indicated it's on its way to 2%, that's better news for us because more dollars can go into goods rather than just food. But it does appear to be a resilient economy. And if I look outside of the United States, candidly, we're seeing some green shoots coming out of the China-Asia trade lane, particularly as it relates to the softness that we saw a year ago.
Carol, we really appreciate you taking time to be with us today. I know a very busy day for you as you really try to sell the UPS story. Carol Tomei, she is the CEO of United Parcel Service. And we do want to go back to that big news of the day, the big national news, and that is the bridge collapse out there in Baltimore, Maryland. The governor of Maryland, Wes Moore, speaking right now alongside Pete Buttigieg and Senator Ben Cardin. Let's listen in.
I know you have had no rest in a very long time, sir. And so I want to say how much we appreciate you. But also, it's to the members of the philanthropic community who've been reaching out and offering support. It's the members of the private sector who've been reaching out and offering support. It's the sandwich companies who have said we're going to shut down because we just want to make sure that the first responders are getting meals. Everybody has stepped up. Everybody has raised their hands to serve. And I can tell you, it is so deeply appreciated. It's so deeply felt. And for everyone who is offering prayers and supports, I can tell you those prayers are working and we are grateful. And the thing that I would ask for people to remember is this. The first, This is very much still a search and rescue mission. We are still actively looking for survivors. We know, and that's the pledge we've made to these families, and this is still very much an active search and rescue mission. And there is not a single resource that we will hold off on deploying. I have already authorized the deployment of everything from air and resources to make sure that this search and rescue operation is carried out to its fullest intent. The second thing I want to remind people is that this will not be short. There's going to be a long road. There's going to be a long road, not just as we go from search and rescue. There'll be a long road as we talk about what does the future of this region, the future of the area look like. And we're going to need each and every one of you. We're thankful to have partners like what we have in the Biden-Harris administration. We're thankful for the partners that we have in our federal delegation. We're thankful for the partners we have in our state and local leadership. We're thankful for the partners that we have in the private sector and the philanthropic community. We're thankful for the partners that we have within the Moore-Miller administration. We're thankful for each and every one of you, both Marylanders and non-Marylanders who have reached out and offered support. We feel it. We need it. And we are truly grateful for it. And I think just in this time, this state has been able to show what it means to be Maryland tough and Baltimore strong. And this state and this city will continue to show exactly that. And so with that, I want to turn it over to our Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, with a deep sense of thanks and appreciation. Oh, I apologize. Before I turn it over to Secretary Buttigieg, I want to turn it over to the dean of our delegation and someone who has been leading from the front this entire time, and we are deeply grateful for the leadership of Senator Ben Cardin.
Governor Moore, first of all, thank you very much for getting our whole team together to meet this challenge. And our prayers are with the families of those that are lost at sea at this moment. As the governor said, it's still a search and rescue. So we are hopeful and we are with the families. I also want to underscore our thanks to our first responders. They did an extraordinary job, acting very quickly and saved lives. So we thank our first responders for everything that they have done. I just really want to underscore a couple points. Our first priority is the search and rescue for those that were on the bridge. We then need to make sure that the channel is reopened. It's critically important to our economy. It affects many, many jobs. It affects not only jobs here in Maryland, but around the country and world. So our next priority is to make sure we get that channel opened. And then we also need to fix and replace the bridge for the surface transportation. We're going to work together as a team. I am very impressed by all the partners that are with us today. We heard from them at the state level, the local level, at the federal level. I particularly want to acknowledge our federal partners. The Secretary of Transportation is with us. We have the Coast Guard. We have the Army Corps of Engineers. We have the investigators. We have the Small Business Administration. They're all here because of the commitment of the partners to work together. A special thanks to President Biden, who's made it very, very clear that he'll do everything in his power to make sure that we get the help we need to deal with this challenge. But as Secretary Buttigieg told us in our briefings, he's going to need the help of Congress in order to get things done. So I want to acknowledge our team, Senator Van Hollen, my partner in the United States Senate on the Appropriations Committee, and the work that he's doing. Congressman Mfume is here. Congressman Trone is here. Team Maryland, our federal delegation, is committed to working together. Senator Van Hollen and I got calls from our leadership that said they're prepared, Secretary Buttigieg, to do everything that we need to do in Congress to make sure you had the resources and the federal partners had the resources in order to get the job done. So I want to thank Senator Schumer for his call and his comments. Senator Murray, Senator Carper, Chair of the Environment and Public Works Committee, have all been in touch with us. It is a team effort, and we're going to make sure that we do everything we can to protect our economy and protect the people of our state. And with that, let me just turn it back to the governor or Secretary Buttigieg. This guy woke all of us up early this morning, so thank you very much.
Thank you. I want to thank Senator Cardin and the entire delegation for their leadership. They have been on this from the first moments. And as the Senator mentioned, and I'll say more about this in a moment, we'll be needing to work together to make sure that we render all of the support that is needed at the federal level. I want to recognize the leadership of Governor Moore, who was already wide awake and hard at work when I reached him in the middle of the night. We just had a very informative briefing with his extraordinary leadership team, and I was moved to see the partnership between state as well as county and city personnel, led by the county executive and the mayor, working hand in glove with us and with our sister federal agencies. And if there's one thing I have to say today, it is a note of gratitude for the extraordinary and courageous work of the first responders, some of whom are in that cold water right now, some of whom are from right here, some of whom have traveled in to render mutual aid, all of whom are responding with extraordinary professionalism and whose work has already saved lives. And to those state, county, and local responders, I would add the extraordinary work of the United States Coast Guard. We should also recognize that this is an excruciating day for several families who went to bed last night having it be a normal night and woke up today to news that no one wants to receive. They are hoping and praying, and we are hoping and praying with them. We are all putting our arms around the community of Baltimore, and that is true for all of this country. I've even heard from counterparts as far away as the United Kingdom reaching out to express their support to the people of Baltimore. As been mentioned, been in close contact with the governor, the mayor, county leadership, and the congressional delegation. And as President Biden has made clear, the federal government will provide all of the support that they need for as long as it takes. This is no ordinary bridge. This is one of the cathedrals of American infrastructure. It has been part of the skyline of this region for longer than many of us have been alive. So the path to normalcy will not be easy. It will not be quick. It will not be inexpensive. But we will rebuild together. In order to make sure that happens, the president's plan is to work with everyone here in order to rebuild this bridge and reopen this port, including our readiness as a department to approve emergency funding as soon as we receive that request. Meanwhile, our Maritime Administration will help with port, harbor, and supply chain operations. Our Federal Highway Administration will assist when it comes to the bridge itself and any ways that we can help ease roadway congestion for residents and commuters who can no longer use this major thoroughfare. The Federal Aviation Administration is even involved, working to keep the airspace above the bridge clear for emergency personnel. PHMSA, our Pipeline and Hazardous Material Safety Administration, is on the scene to help with any hazmat issues. And our newly stood up Freight Office is already at work preparing for supply chain impacts that we know are coming because of the importance of this port, not just to the Baltimore region, but really to the entire United States economy. We're going to be working closely with the National Transportation Safety Board as they lead their independent investigation and with the Coast Guard as they continue operations in the water. I've also spoken with Secretary Mayorkas, who's working to ensure that all DHS assets are integrated. So in many ways, our work is just beginning to rebuild this bridge and deal with impacts in the meantime, to reopen this port and deal with supply chain impacts in the meantime. But today we are most acutely focused on the emergency operations underway and on the families that have been impacted. I have no doubt that we will rebuild together and that Baltimore will come back stronger than ever before. And with that, I will turn it back over to the governor to lead media questions. Governor?
All right, everybody, you've been just listening to U.S. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. They're on site in Baltimore, of course. The site of the bridge collapse, if you will, after a tanker crashed into it early this morning. Pete Buttigieg talking about this being one of the cathedrals of American infrastructure, talking about the priority of it and getting it back to order, and also talking about the individuals who have been impacted by it. And there's still some unknowns in terms of individuals and maybe potentially loss of lives. But there with Maryland, Senator Ben Cardin and also the governor of Maryland, Wes Moore.
Yeah, the secretary also talking about the outpouring of support that he's received from around the world in the wake of this tragedy. We'll continue to bring you updates as we do get them. In the meantime, let's get a check on what's going on just ahead of the market close. Here's John Tucker.
Yeah, like we've seen in the past, it's starting to fade as we head to the close. S&P 500 right now down 6 points. That's down 1/10%. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is up just a point right now. The NASDAQ Composite Index has turned lower. That is now down 34 points, down about 0.2%. Among some of the stocks that we see on the move today, shares of Tesla after Cathy Wood announced that she's buying shares. Right now, they are up 3%. Apple shares, they announced their next meeting coming up in June, at which they're going to disclose some of their artificial intelligence strategy moving forward. Those shares right now near the close, down about 0.5%. And the Donald Trump stock, first day of trading on the NASDAQ, DJT, the ticker symbol, that's erased a lot of the earlier gains. Remember, it was up close to 45% right now near the close, 19% higher again the first day of trading on the NASDAQ. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tim and Carol.
I'm driving in my car. I turn on the radio.
How about you let me drive?
Oh, no. Who's gonna drive you home? Honey, please, I'll do the driving. Drive on. Excuse me,
This is the Drive to the Close.
That funky music will drive us till the dawn.
On Bloomberg Radio.
All right, TikTok, everybody, just about 7 minutes left in the Tuesday trading session. And for a second day in a row, we're seeing some selling here into the close. We're pretty much just around our worst levels, if not at our worst levels, as John Tucker just mentioned, for the S&P Dow and the NASDAQ 100. So let's get to our drive to the close guest.
Yeah, we got with us Leo Kelly, founder and CEO at Verdance Capital Advisors. He joins us from Hunt Valley, Maryland. Leo, good to have you back with us. Look, before we talk markets, you're joining us from just north of Baltimore, only about half an hour from the collapsed Francis Scott Key Bridge. We've been covering the story all day. We're thinking about everyone affected by the tragedy. Just give us an idea about how important this bridge is that crosses the outer harbor.
Well, it's the east side of Baltimore, and it is a significant thoroughfare. So the disruption is going to be pretty extraordinary, especially because the folks just on either side of that bridge, the next path from one side to the other is a long commute. Plus, you've got the port shut down. So it's an extraordinary event. Obviously, it's at the front of everybody's mind here in Baltimore and in the surrounding area. So we're praying for the folks that are impacted, both now and over the next couple of years. And Baltimore didn't need this break. So we're hoping this will be a quick recovery, obviously.
Yeah, we do too, and we've certainly heard from the president, from the transportation secretary, and other officials saying that this is going to be certainly priority, and they're going to commit whatever efforts and I guess money, it sounds like, in federal funds to get this done as quickly as possible. You know, having said that, Leo, and we know that there's still a lot to be known, and there's lives that we're waiting to hear if there's been lives lost and so on and so forth. But it made me kind of think, we live in a world where we are constantly reminding that things can come at us from unexpected directions, different magnitudes, different scale, if you will, but it kind of keeps us on our toes. And we're waiting to assess how much of this might have an impact on the U.S. supply chains, and a lot to be known. And obviously, the longer it's a problem, the longer the higher potential for it to become a supply chain problem. Having said that, how do you think about kind of where we are in this market environment? Does it feel tenuous at all? Does it feel like sure-footed? How do you see it?
It does feel a little bit tenuous. Today's activity aside, it does feel a little bit tenuous. And I think it feels tenuous because you have a pocket of the market that's running up to extraordinary levels. I think the last time we were on, we were talking about some of the AI bubble that was brewing. And we're really at this interesting tug of war right now. The Fed is still trying to battle back inflation. Inflation is being very persistent, and we've talked about this before. It's just because there's so much capital flushing around in the system. So the market is excited about the fact that the economy is being resilient. It's excited about the fact that inflation has slowed, but I would stress slowing inflation is still inflation, and the Fed is still fighting it. So I think one of the challenges that the economy has, that the market has, is that when the Fed gets more aggressive, inflation does slow, but then we start to see an economy showing danger signals. So the Fed slows down or stops rates. I mean, this concept of 6 rate cuts this year I always thought was absurd, because as soon as you start to get the least bit dovish, the inflation numbers start to signal higher again. So this is going to be an interesting tug of war with valuations higher. And we haven't had much volatility since October. I do think this is a time for discipline, quite frankly.
Hey, Leo, very briefly, what are some of those warning signs that you're starting to see, if any, right now?
Well, I think you have a mixed message around the economy. Small business confidence has been down. Inflation is going back up. We get mixed messages with the ISM surveys versus the employment numbers. So I think that's one of the first challenges, right? Some of the lead indicators. And so really what's interesting about this current economic data that's coming out is anybody who wants to come to a conclusion can find the data. If you want to be positive, you can find the data. If you want to be negative, you can find the data. Where I'm concerned is that inflation has remained persistent.
Got it.
And the Fed keeps talking about the fact that they're going to cut rates, and they just start to get a little more dovish.
Okay. Forgive us, Leo. We've got to run. We'll check in with you soon. Leo Kelly, founder and CEO at Verdence Capital Advisors there in Maryland. Folks, over to our TV colleagues. Beyond the Bell starts now.
Beyond the Bell, Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage of the U.S. market close starts right now.
And right now, we are 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day. Romaine Bostic alongside Alex Steele. We're counting you down to the closing bell, here to help take us beyond the bell. It's a global simulcast with the entire team. Scarlett Fu joining us in the TV studio, Carol Masser and Tim Stenovic in the radio fishbowl. Welcome to our audiences across our Bloomberg platforms. On what, Carol Masser?
Yeah.
Looks like it's going to be another down day. Modest losses, but a third straight day of decline.
Modest losses, and again, I'm struck by some selling into the close, right? I feel like, again, this is a trend line we haven't seen, and I think this is the second day in a row where we're kind of seeing this movement, and it just makes me wonder, are investors a little bit nervous about maybe not getting those 3 rate cuts or 2 rate cuts, and maybe not even 1 rate cut this year?
Well, we should point out, too, I mean, we're at the end of the quarter, too, or end of the month and the quarter as well. So, and given how much equities have run up, you're probably going to see a little selling, maybe some profit taking and rebalancing.
And why not? I mean, year to date up 9%, so that's a pretty good quarter on the S&P 500. On the NASDAQ composite, up 8.7%. Look, not the end of the quarter yet at this point, Scarlett, but that's a pretty good one.
Yeah, well, prepare for the next 2 days to look like today as well, where you just have a lot of nibbling around the edges. No one wants to make any big moves, especially with PCE coming out on Friday when the markets close. You're not really going to be able to react to that until Monday morning.
Totally right. Also, I should point out that the S&P is, 13 to 14% above its 200-day moving average, so we've been quite extended. So any kind of softness shouldn't be too much of a surprise on that front.
Absolutely, and you fold into that what for a lot of people is basically a holiday week. A lot of folks on vacation with a Good Friday on Friday, and of course Easter Sunday coming up as well. A volume slightly lower than where it normally would be over the last 30 days. Modest losses here on the day as we get the closing bells in New York. The Dow Jones Industrial Average lower by less than 0.1%, down roughly about 15 points as we wait for these numbers to settle. The S&P also down by a similar amount, roughly 14 points. That's about 0.3% lower. The NASDAQ composite is going to finish out the day lower by about 0.4%, and the Russell 2000 down on the day by 0.2%.
All right, digging a little bit deeper into the S&P 500, so those big cap companies. Hey, folks, almost an even split, but a little bit more to the downside. 214 names, Scarlett, actually higher for the session, the Tuesday trade. 282 to the downside, and you've got 7 unchanged.
All right, let's take a look at the sectors through the IMAP. It'll show you that 8 out of the 11 sectors are in the red, plenty of red there. in terms of the big decliners, you have utilities and tech and energy leading the way down. Ironically, or maybe not so ironically, two of those groups were among the best performers yesterday. Healthcare, financials, and staples kind of bucking the decline, but not by a whole lot. They're up at most by 1/3 of 1%.
All right, guys, to the individual gainers, I go. The number 2 gainer in the NASDAQ 100 today is Tesla. That stock at its highs up about 6.7%, finishing the day just shy of 3%. An Italian newspaper out reporting that officials at the country's industry ministry contacted Tesla about potential production of electric trucks. So maybe some speculating that that's why we saw Tesla trend a little bit higher in today's session. We know Tesla has certainly been under pressure. Stocks down about 28% so far in 2024.
Oh, look at that board you got there. This is like the Carol Massa board. Tesla, Trump, and Krispy Kreme.
Yeah, that's my world.
You just put Royal Caribbean on there and we're all set.
That's me in a nutshell.
No, the NASDAQ Golden Dragon Index.
All right. Wow. All right, I'm moving along here. All right, let's go to the ticker DJT, which stands for, of course, Donald J. Trump. It's actually called Trump Media and Technology Group. That one up almost 60% at its highs today. Its first official day of trading. We know it was a SPAC, and so, of course, a merger with Digital World Acquisition. It's an unprofitable company. This is something that we've been trying to dig into a little bit more today. Finishing the day with a 16% gain, but soaring. It did also trigger a brief volatility-related trading halt, but nonetheless, as I said, some outperformance in that one. Day 2 will be an interesting trade, no doubt. Krispy Kreme, yes, I actually don't eat Krispy Kreme, but nonetheless, if you go to McDonald's
That's
now,
quite the flex. You just don't like donuts?
No, they're not donuts. They're like sugar blown up in donut form.
They're like air, right?
Yeah, they're like air sugar.
They're like
really
air
good.
All right. Well, anyway, investors kind of gobbling them up today. Stocks up almost about 40% in today's session. $17.35 a share is the close. Soaring the most since, I think, 2021. McDonald's, July of 2021. McDonald's agreeing to bring the donuts to restaurants across the U.S.
That would be the IPO, Carol Masser.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
This is why we have you here. Those little
Is this
nuggets
why?
that just make us
Thank
smarter.
you, because I was trying to figure out.
That's exactly why. Nonetheless, the nationwide rollout is expected by the end of 2026. So some of you will have to wait. I'm done.
You're done?
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
Let's see what Tim has.
I do want to start with UPS. You guys were just speaking to UPS CEO Carol Tomé a little earlier. Shares ended up closing down 8%. The company did come out and say earlier today that sales and profit will grow over the next 3 years, but investors were skeptical that the targets are within reach. The stock fell. Alex, I loved your question. You started the interview to Carol Tomé asking her why investors aren't liking what they saw. Earlier in the presentation, she said, if I can answer that question, I would probably have a different job.
It was a pretty good. It was a pretty good CEO answer.
Yeah,
like I respected her for throwing at that.
Kudos to you too. Hey, also keep an eye on shares of Maersk, the ADRs at least here that are traded here in the U.S. Doing that, of course, because the Dali, the Singapore registered container ship that struck the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore early this morning, was operated by a charter company, Synergy Group, but is time chartered by Maersk, carrying Maersk customers' cargo. The company did say none of its crew and personnel were on the vessel. Shares today down, ADRs down 2.44%. And then how about a little?
And I saw some of the other stocks related to that Baltimore port also moving lower, including a lot of those coal companies as well.
Yeah, certainly worth keeping an eye on what happens when it comes to supply chain challenges over this tragedy, and we'll of course keep you updated on that. How about a little paper company M&A to round things out? International Paper shares falling 6.5% on the day. This after reports that the company wants to launch a formal offer for the British multinational packaging business, DS Smith. The concern that International Paper investors may have is over a possible bidding war because Mondi did agree to buy it for about $6.5 billion just a little bit ago. Sky News did report that International Paper was considering an offer for $6.31 billion or more for DS Smith. So a little paper packaging bidding war happening here, potentially.
A side note on Maersk, I was talking to a BI analyst, Bloomberg Intelligence analyst, and think of Maersk in this instance as basically the rider in an Uber. So they're not the Uber or the driver or the car, they're just the person in the back seat. I thought that was really helpful.
But they do have cargo on there.
Yeah, but you're just riding in it.
Yeah.
You're just riding in it.
Yeah.
Yield's doing nothing. That's what I got.
Okay, that's a good.
Wasn't there a bond auction?
Yeah, but you got something.
All right, yeah, we have GameStop earnings. And when I say earnings, yeah, maybe it turned a profit in the fourth quarter. Adjusted EPS of the fourth quarter was 22 cents. Analysts were looking for 30 cents. When I say analysts, literally 2 analysts had projections. So take it with a grain of salt. Fourth quarter net sales, Carol, $1.79 billion. Analysts, 2 of them, were looking for $2.05 billion.
Yeah, and just to remind everybody, I mean, it's down about, 11, 12% so far this year, and it's got a huge short position on it. About 22% remain of the float is shorted, so yeah.
Yeah, but this just kind of continues that trend. We were joking yesterday with Bailey Lipschultz about the idea that they are actually showing profitability this quarter, and Bailey pointed out that's because it's a holiday quarter, but you still got sales down 20% or 19% on a year-over-year basis, which seems to be the trend that they've had now for, I don't know, how many quarters? I've lost track. 14?
I would say we'll find out more on the conference call.
Will we?
But there will be no conference call
today
for GameStop. Once again, the company's saying
Nicely played.
They will not be holding a conference call today, but referring people to the 10K for additional information.
That's very accessible to everyone.
Yeah.
So that stock down 13%. But, you know, if I pair this with the DJT, clearly meme stocks are still of interest, just maybe not GameStop at this moment.
Where's the growth coming from for this company? Because I'm just going through hardware
what does it do
and
again?
accessories down 12%, software sales down 31%, collectibles down 25%.
Do they still have actual stores?
That's
Yeah,
not
they
growth.
do.
That's,
They do.
That's,
wow.
you know,
Okay.
business going down, right? That's not growth. Like you say, you do wonder, right?
It's not growth.
Like, why are
There's a
people
negative
doing
sign in front of it.
Expenses are going down 21% year over year, so that's a good thing.
Okay.
Long-term debt remains limited to a low interest rate environment. That's something. Anyway,
Well,
that stock down 15%.
Can we talk about donuts?
Can we talk about
More about
You
donuts?
want to do more about donuts? Or how about, wait, you want to talk about...
Do you remember, well, speaking of which, remember when Krispy Kreme was like the meme stock? Way back
in
when?
the day, yeah.
Way back in
I once
the
got
day.
yelled at by my boss because I told him, you know, it wasn't really a news story. Yet here,
And
here I
look
am.
at it now.
Look, McDonald's, wants them in their stores, so...
That's actually one thing that surprises me about the Krispy Kreme story is just how long it's going to take for this rollout. They said by next year they'll have this partnership in
Anything
place.
that McDonald's does takes a long
Just
time.
because of the
Just
scale?
because of the scale.
You
It's so
can't make
massive.
Happy Meals happy so quickly or happier.
Exactly.
It's just
changing one ingredient causes all these ripple effects up and down the supply chain.
I thought we were getting healthier. Forgive me. I thought we were going to healthier food.
Well, yeah, you can do that, and then you can get your injection of your weight loss drug.
Welcome to Sarcasm Television. This is just kind of that mood. Yeah, kind of interesting. All right, guys, that is a wrap. Our cross-platform coverage, radio, TV, YouTube, Bloomberg Originals. We will see you. We will be happier, maybe, tomorrow. We'll see you for Beyond the Bell.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
It is Bloomberg Business Week. Carol, we've talked a lot this month
Yes.
about companies and climate change, thanks to the recent SEC approval of climate disclosure requirements for public companies. A quick reminder for everybody.
Yes.
The SEC will now force companies to disclose their greenhouse gas emissions for the first time, but the regulator is not going to force companies to quantify pollution from their supply chains or customers. That's known as Scope 3 emissions. We talked about it a lot on the program. Critics to the SEC rule who have said that it hasn't gone far enough, have pushed back on
supply
this.
chains are so important, right?
Yeah.
And the impact that they have certainly on the environment. After all, carbon dioxide emissions are on track for one of the biggest increases in record this year, pushing the planet closer to catastrophic climate change. That jump, the result of human-induced pollution, plus the El Nino weather pattern, which weakens the ability of the world's natural carbon to sinks to absorb CO2. This is according to a forecast by the UK's Met Office. But our next guest is thinking a lot about sustainability.
Yeah, and the role that businesses play when it comes to climate change. Judith Visa is a global sustainability officer of Siemens. It's the $152 billion market cap engineering, manufacturing, and tech company based in Munich. She's here in the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. Judith, how are you?
I'm really well. Hello, you both.
Hello, hello.
So we'll get to all the nitty gritty in a minute, but I just thinking big picture here. Like in a world where there's so much bad news about climate, over and over again, Carol and I are hit with it. We're almost desensitized to it. Although we would argue that we're seeing the actual implications of it more and more.
Yeah, absolutely.
In our days. How do you think about the position that you have at a company that, you know, when we think about CO2, when we think about carbon emissions, industry is responsible for a lot of it?
Oh yeah, I mean, industry accounts for about 29% globally. Add buildings to that, that's another 40%. You know, think transport, and then you're almost there.
It's almost the whole pie.
That's almost the whole pie. And we have enabling technologies that help from a decarbonization, resource efficiency in all of these areas. We work with industrial customers to digitalize, automate their manufacturing, think about product design and process design differently. But we also help with managing buildings and grids to decarbonize those, attribute to energy efficiency. And of course, we're building trains, and what better ways of transport to decarbonize the world than to get people to use trains.
Well, and as we said, I'm looking at our supply function on the Bloomberg when it comes to your company. You've got, at least based on ours, I think it's like basically some of your biggest suppliers, some 84, 102 customers. I'm sure there's a lot more. But again, I think it's kind of your major on both the inputs and the outputs, if you will. Having said that, what really moves the needle, in your view, when it comes to, when you work with companies, when it comes to sustainability, and how do we get to a point where we think about, let's not create the bad stuff so that we don't have to somehow cover or, quantify it. Not quantify it, but, kind of factor it out.
Well, first of all, I think that transparency around data is actually a huge advantage, yeah? And we can talk a long time about...
But if we're missing the supply chain, is that a problem?
Oh, yes, of course.
Yeah.
Of course, of course. I mean, the scopes are there for a reason, and we're a signatory of science-based targets. We wouldn't have signed that if we didn't believe that all the scopes were important. And we happen to be one of those enterprises that are actually not very energy intense in scope 1 and 2. But for us, supply chain is important. We've got 65,000 tier 1 suppliers alone, which is quite complex for an enterprise our size, because of the many different things that we do from a technology perspective. So that is important. And then, of course, also how our products deliver downstream, scope 3 downstream. But for us, it's also important to understand and help our customers understand what we can do for them in terms of abatement. So last year alone, we probably attributed about 190 million tons of avoided emissions with customers.
So just away with them.
Away with them. And if I give you the other number for supply chain, that's around about 10 million tons. So even though it's a little bit comparing apples with pears, but just to give you the magnitude of the challenge, in terms of who we are in terms of our supply chain, but also what the technology can do for our customers.
How did you view the SEC ruling earlier this month? Does it, in your opinion, not go far enough? I mean, how did we look in comparison to the EU, for example?
Well, we're a DAX-listed company, so we're listed in Germany, so therefore the SEC ruling doesn't affect us directly, but in Europe, and I'm sure you know that very well, the regulatory requirements are huge, are much, much bigger than anywhere else at this stage.
So what's your view on how it looks in the US? I mean, is it kind of just like we're not even catching up?
Well, I think every country needs to find their own way of either sending positive signals, and I think with the Inflation Reduction Act, you have done a lot in terms of positive investments into clean energy and clean technologies. I think the EU has a reputation for being heavier on the regulatory side versus actually helping from an investment perspective. I think both is needed. I think both is needed at the end of the day.
What holds it back, Judith? I mean, I grew up where there were solar panels on homes and they were taken down because they didn't sell. I'm just curious, what is it that is taking so long in terms of the transition and being better in terms of the output that still impacts the environment in a negative way? I mean, I'm thinking about coming off our summer here where we had orange skies, right? And just, I don't need to do the list. You're very much aware of it. Anybody who's a global citizen is aware of what's been going on, and it's different. So how do we move quicker, and why don't we?
$1 million question, because one of the good news, bad news facts is that the technology to get us much more safely into 2030 is already there. It just needs rapid deployment.
So why are we
not doing it? Yeah. So I would say different reasons. One is if I go Europe in comparison to the US, the cost of energy is probably twice as high in Europe as it is here. Was even higher, when war in the Ukraine broke out. So the return on investment into anything that helps from an energy efficiency efficiency perspective, of course, is huge in Europe. Yeah? So the business case for investing into that is a better one by comparison than here. On the other hand, I think there are a lot of companies also here in the US who basically take their responsibility very seriously and are trying to do the right things when it comes to climate change. And then there is a lot of customers of ours who are in business to consumer, and of course there is a lot of change in the perception of consumers around products that they would or wouldn't buy. So, but I think all of these things take time, and time is what we actually don't have. And so therefore, I think there is also a role to play for governments and community, whether that's at a community level or at a national level, to actually set the tone in terms of either the regulatory side and this is obviously much preferable, in terms of inducing an investment.
Penalty, tax, whatever, right? To kind of get us, why do people have,
or incentives,
right? Or incentives.
Incentives,
exactly. Good point. The positive side of it.
The positive side of things.
2024, an election year here in the U.S. I think it's fair to say that the current president, President Biden, has a different view on climate change and sustainability than the presumptive nominee, former President Donald Trump. Does it matter to you, as Global Sustainability Officer at Siemens, who the president of the U.S. is?
Well, I mean, of course, it is important, who some of the big players are around the globe, and we face a geopolitical situation that is very different to just 5 or 10 years ago. But look, as Siemens, we've been here for 160 years. Yeah, for 160 years, we have worked with the elected parties and the policymakers, and for us, I think that's at the end of the day the most important thing. It's policy, not politics. Yeah, and we will work with.
We've talked a lot about the difference of that over the last couple of weeks. But forgive me. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, and so I think for us it's more that. Yeah, what's going to happen going forward? And at the end of the day, we're all in business, and I think we will do what makes business sense. And there is, in many regards, also a business case for sustainability. I think we've seen that through a lot of bipartisan support as well.
All right, great to have you here. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Judith Visa, she's Global Sustainability Officer at Siemens, joining us here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. You're listening and watching Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Master, Tim Stanovic, and this is Bloomberg.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. After being higher for most of the trading session, the major stock averages turned lower in the final minutes. The third day of losses. It's approaching the end of the quarter, so after the recent run-up, there was a bit of profit-taking. Little caution also ahead of the release of Friday, the Fed's preferred inflation measure. NVIDIA leading losses in the mega caps today. You had 8 of the 11 major industry groups in the S&P 500 down. And then former President Donald Trump's startup, Trump Media and Technology Group, that surged in the first session as a publicly traded company on the NASDAQ. But it gave up much of the earlier gains. It did close up. The shares were up about 16%, a little over that. United Parcel Service fell as investors saw its long-term sales target as hard to meet. It was the worst performing stock of the S&P 500 today. And then shares of the spice maker McCormick, the best performing stock in the S&P 500. The index closing down 14%. Down 0.3%, 5203 on the S&P 500. The Nasdaq was down 68 points, a decline of 0.4%, and the Dow Jones Industrial Average 31 points lower on the day, down about 0.8%. And we check the markets for you all day long, right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Carolyn Kim.
All right, everybody, you are listening and watching Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Massar along with Tim Stenovic. And
this tape will self-destruct in 20 seconds.
You're going to love this next guest. You're going to be like, can I ask a question? Can I ask a question? Because we have someone who spent...
What are you saying, I can't?
John, you can do anything. A really cool guest who spent, 2 decades as a CIA agent and is writing about it.
Yeah, she's so good at disguising herself that she once made her way into the Oval Office to meet President George H.W. Bush, the whole while pretending to be someone else. There was a reason she pulled this stunt. She was chief of disguise in the CIA's Office of Technical Service, and she was accompanying Judge William Webster, then the CIA director, to show off the new disguise capabilities of the CIA.
Yeah, it's just one of the stories featured in her new book. I have to say, we've been talking about it in a lead up to this. The book is entitled In True Face, A Woman's Life in the CIA Unmasked. Jonna Mendez spent more than 25 years as a CIA officer working all over the world, including in Moscow, Pakistan, Hong Kong, and more. She joins us from Reston, Virginia. Jonna, we are delighted to have you here with us, and I think she's joining us. Jonna, are you there?
I think she might be having trouble with her Zoom.
Jonna, are you there?
I think we're good.
Oh,
okay,
yay.
there she is.
Yay.
Awesome.
We thought you were maybe off on another mission. We were a little worried. You were leaving. You got the call. The CIA said, we need you back.
There was a mission. It wasn't secret, though.
It was not secret because we were watching you the whole time.
And it's over.
It's over. It's over. We were talking about the one time you disguised yourself making your way into the Oval Office to meet with George H.W. Bush, the whole time pretending to be someone else. We kicked it off there. Tell us about this stunt, first of all. We wanted to start there and why you were doing this.
Well, it's one of my favorite moments, so I'm always happy to talk about it. I was chief of disguise. We had been working for years to come up with a totally animated mask, a mask that would actually work, you could talk, you could laugh, you could smile. And we got there, and the very first mask that was made was an African-American man, and it was made for me to demonstrate to various people. And it was good. So I took it to my office director, and he loved it. And he said, we're going to take it to the director of CIA, Bill Webster. And he loved it. And he said, we're going to the White House. And I said, I don't know if the Secret Service is going to let me through because I look good, but I don't sound like a man. I don't walk like a man. So we did another one. I turned into another quite different looking woman. We went to the White House. We went for the morning meeting. Brent Scowcroft, Bob Gates, John Sununu. It was a good crowd. It was a quality crowd. And I was the first one that morning to brief the president. He had been director of the CIA previously in another life. And I had a handful of pictures of him in disguise, which was kind of to relax everybody. And he's laughing and he likes his pictures. I said, so I'm going to show you the latest, greatest, best thing we've got. And I said, I'll take it off. And I started, and he said, well, no, don't take it off. Whatever it is, don't take it off. And he walked out around my chair and he's looking and he's peering and he's trying to figure out, is it a fake nose? He didn't know what I had on. Then he sat down, he said, okay. Took off my mask and held it up so that he could see it was light as a feather. It was
the great reveal.
Hey, beautiful.
Jonna, we're going to get to the history of your career. I mean, there's so much here. We've got plenty of time with you, which is great. But I'm just curious, how much, if masks were that good in the late 1980s, early 1990s, when you did this, how much better is the technology now?
Well, isn't that a good question? Because for many, many years, I never talked about masks. They were considered truly classified. And then it changed, and we can discuss masks. I'm not really sure how that worked. It makes me think that they are no longer classified, or they wouldn't let me talk about them. And that makes me think that we no longer use them.
Why do you think that would be?
Or at least we don't use the same thing that we were using then.
Okay.
So I don't know.
Well, if let's say we don't use them anymore, why wouldn't we use them anymore? Is it because of biometrics and they've just gotten so good you can't really fool someone?
Yeah, because of cyber, because of the incredible technological surveillance that's out there now, this ubiquitous technical surveillance everywhere all the time. Different materials react differently to different light sources. So under IR, it might look good. Under ultraviolet, it might look like a dandelion. You don't know. I don't know. But the fact that I can talk about them tells me that they are no longer, perhaps.
How did you get your book? How did you get your book past the folks who, I don't want to call them censors, but the approval process?
The Publication Review Board.
Yeah. How'd you get your book past them?
Well, you cross the fingers on both of your hands. You remind them that by statute, it should be a 30-day review. It's never a 30-day review. And you just kind of distract yourself because it can take 6 months for them to finish, looking at it. And they come back and they say, there are some things here that are still classified and we're asking you to take them out. And this is our 5th book. We take them out. We don't want to put classified material in our books. It's not a light touch, but it's not nearly as severe as it used to be.
Jonna, I think when we think CIA or a woman working in CIA, and I know it's not apples to apples, but for me, I'm like, is it Homeland? Is it like Homeland? Like, you're running and you've got guns and you've got money and you've got all this. Like, what is it really like?
Well, you won't like my answer because I didn't watch much of Homeland.
All right.
The woman, Claire Danes.
Yes, Claire Danes.
She irritated me so much I couldn't keep watching.
I will say,
The Americans.
Okay.
Give it another chance, though. It's a good show.
Okay. But all right, so you watched The Americans. So, but what was it like to be a woman in the CIA?
Well, it was hard. If you wanted to be in the operational piece of it, now, there were other parts of CIA where women had made good inroads. The analytical part of it that women did wonderfully as analysts. Science and technology, if you had a degree in chemistry or physics or optics or whatever, we would hire you. We would hire you at a lower grade than the men, but we would bring you in. But in operations, it was, that's overseas, that's feet on the ground, that's meeting with the foreign targets or the foreign assets if they agree to work with us. People who are truly often risking their lives to work for American intelligence. And the men just had this firmly fixed idea that those people didn't want to be working with women, that they wouldn't, that in many cultures, women have no credibility, that have no value. And they said, we can't put you out in the middle of that. It was this kind of big, it was vague, it was sort of menacing. It was like the women, well, yeah, I can't say what I said to them here on radio, but I said BS. That's not true. These men, it's always men. It was always men. These men are risking their lives.
What would you say? We've got about a minute, and then we'll take a break and come back. But what would you say women bring to the table that men don't in this kind of situation? And again, we've got about a minute, and then we'll come back and continue.
Well, in that scenario, women have an empathy that I think men don't necessarily carry around in their hip pocket. The men are interested in training this foreigner in whatever the technology is that they're going to report to us. And they're very focused on the mechanics of that thing. Well, I can do the mechanics as well, but I can also, I don't hold their hand, but I can reassure them. I can talk to them. There's a soft power that women can bring to these scenarios that has real value. And I discovered over time it has really good value. I found myself a couple of times retraining people. You know, if I'm showing someone how this gadget works, and if he doesn't get it right away, he has no problem saying to me, a woman, can we run through that again? Whereas if it's one of my male colleagues doing the same training, he gets done, he says, got it? The guy is going to say, yeah, I got it.
Interesting.
And maybe he didn't get it.
Interesting. We're going to continue, though, in just a moment.
Yeah, Jonna, sit tight because we're going to do some news and come back. We're talking to Jonna Mendez, the author of In True Face, A Woman's Life in the CIA, Unmasked. Let's go to Washington, D.C. now for a check of the latest world and national news. We got Nancy Lyons in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom. Hey, Nance.
Thanks, Tim. President Biden says the government will make sure the people of Baltimore are made whole after this morning's bridge collapse.
I've directed my team to move heaven and earth to reopen the port and rebuild the bridge as soon as humanly possible. And we're going to work hand in hand with the support of Maryland to support Maryland whatever they ask for.
Biden says he plans to have the government pay for the price of rebuilding the bridge. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg says it's still a search and rescue mission at the Baltimore site. A Maersk container ship rammed the Francis Scott Key Bridge in the wee hours of the morning, causing the entire structure to fall into the water.
This is one of the cathedrals of American infrastructure. It has been part of the skyline of this region for longer than many of us have been alive. So the path to normalcy will not be easy. It will not be quick. It will not be inexpensive. But we will rebuild together.
Buttigieg says the entire nation is putting its arms around Baltimore. The Supreme Court heard arguments today in a case that could limit access to the abortion pill mifepristone. Justices are reviewing an appeals court decision blocking recent FDA changes that made the medication more widely available. Solicitor General Elizabeth Prelogar argued on behalf of the Biden administration.
FDA's ultimate conclusion was that mifepristone could safely be dispensed without in-person visits. It had voluminous evidence, I think, to support that conclusion in 2021, and there's been no contrary evidence that's been introduced.
Prelogar says the plaintiffs, which are anti-abortion doctors, do not have the legal right to sue. The justices sounded like they would support keeping mifepristone widely available. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Nancy Lyons. This is Bloomberg.
And I'm John Tucker, the Bloomberg News, and with this Bloomberg Business Flash. In the final minutes of trading, the stock averages went from higher to lower. S&P 500 ending the session near 5,200 with NVIDIA holding its six-day rally and dropping about 2.5%. UPS slumping as investors saw its long-term sales target as hard to meet. Worst performing stock, in fact, in the S&P 500 today. Former President Donald Trump's startup, Trump Media and Technology Group, climbed in its first session as a publicly traded company in the NASDAQ, ending the session up 16%. The Treasury is rebounding from session lows after a $67 billion sale of 5-year notes today. Meantime, Julian Emanuel of Evercore ISI sees signs of over-exuberance in markets.
The wall of worry having been completely dissolved, very aberrant behavior in the options markets, betting on stocks doubling in the course of 3 or 4 days, incredible betting on the NASDAQ rallying a further 33%.
And then you have Shockwave Medical jumping as much as 14% today to its highest level on record. This comes after the Wall Street Journal reported that Johnson & Johnson is in talks to acquire the medical device maker. S&P 500 ending the session down 14 points at 5203. The Dow Jones Industrial Average was down 31 points to end the session at 39,282. And the NASDAQ Composite Index, 68 points lower, down 0.4%. And we check the markets for you all day long, right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Carol and Tim.
Thank you so much for that update, John Tucker. Really do appreciate it. Let's get back to... I do appreciate it.
We do, actually. We very much appreciate you, John.
I want to get back to our guest.
It's the polite tour.
Jana Mendez. She is the author of the new book, In True Face, A Woman's Life in the CIA Unmasked. She spent more than 25 years as a CIA officer working all over the world, including Moscow, Pakistan, Hong Kong, and more. Joining us once again from Virginia.
So I want to go back
from an undisclosed location.
From an undisclosed
Virginia.
No, but we know where you are because we can see you. Jana, I want to go back to how much of, your career in the CIA were you, in an office or meeting with, an agent or a source or something. I mean, were there moments where you really were in danger? I'm just curious about that because I think I hear CIA and I know there's different levels, but I'm just curious about your own since you were in some pretty serious spots, over the last few decades. Yeah.
I was in some situations that were certainly uncomfortable. I was in some situations that I think you would call dangerous. Not all the time. It didn't happen frequently. But when it happened, I had so much training that I had a very good sense of what I ought to do. Not that it would always work, but what I should try. That's a very vague answer to a kind of general question. There was some danger there. Mostly there was not.
Mostly there was not.
Mostly.
Well, but it's so interesting because I think you guys... when we talk to someone like you, we get a peek into what the CIA is like and what goes on behind the scenes. And there's layers, right, in terms of gathering, deciphering, and, utilizing intelligence.
Yeah, I mean, the whole job is to bring back the information to American policymakers so they can make smart decisions. Information on the plans and intentions of our enemies. Now, if you just glance around the world right now and wonder, what is Putin planning? What are the Chinese going to do next? What about those Koreans with their nuclear missiles? You can imagine the kind of intelligence that our policymakers wanted and needed. Our job was to go find it, to find people who were conduits to that information, who could get it for us. We had all kinds of technology that we used. We had all kinds of tools that we could train them in. We had methods of their communicating that information to us where we didn't have to meet face to face, which would really put them in danger. Typically, if we worried about danger, we worried about our foreign assets. They were the ones who were sometimes risking everything to work for us for a variety of reasons. It wasn't always money. They weren't always asking to be paid. A lot of them would work for us just for the promise that we would get their kids out of their country, get them to the West, get them educated over here. The motivators were always interesting, but whatever was involved to get the information was what we were about.
Jonna, can you talk to us a little bit about Argo? Because as I was doing research about you, I was struck that you co-wrote, along with your late husband, Antonio Mendez, a book about the hostage crisis.
Canadian caper.
Yeah, what exactly happened in 1979, 1980 in Iran, and your late husband's role, who, by the way, was portrayed by Ben Affleck in the film.
Yes, he was.
Take us back. I mean, I don't know what you were doing at that time, but what can you tell us about that whole experience, that whole event?
I had nothing to do with Argo when it happened. I was working in the same office, but because compartmentation is what it is, I didn't even know that it had happened.
Wow.
Wow, that says a lot, right?
They started making that movie 19 years later, which, just to point it out, Tony kept that secret for 19 years, and he never intended to tell that story. George Tenet, the head of CIA, directed him to tell the story to the New York Times. It was a moment in history when it was quiet. People were questioning, did we even need a CIA? And George Tenet, I think, very wisely decided to tell one good story of showing the value of the organization. Tony was going to go to his grave with that story. It was remarkable. When we got the call in the middle of the night that said George Clooney's going to buy the story, the rights to the story, the next morning over coffee, Tony said, "You know what that means? It means we got to write the book, because they'll move the story around, they'll change things a little bit. It won't be exactly 100%." And so we did that. We wrote the book, they wrote the script. And it's kind of interesting to compare them. The heart of the story is certainly there. But small things, like Tony was never separated from his first wife. Tony had 3 kids, not 1. So his other 2 kids are still angry about that because they didn't get to be in the movie. Nobody chased an airplane down a runway in a Jeep with a gun. They added that, or just a little flourish at the end. The story in the middle of going in and getting those 6 American diplomats and bringing them out, that's what happened. And, you know, we were in touch with, and I'm still in touch with, all of them. We call them the house guests. They still, every once in a while, something comes up, we write notes back and forth. Who's doing what? Tony probably saved their lives. And it was just a moment. It was one, when he did it, it was just another operation. And it turned out to be so much more.
Unbelievable. Did you ever get to go to the set? Meet Clooney, Pitt?
Yes. Yes.
What was that like?
The opening scene where they're in the embassy and they're trying to shred those documents and things out. And everybody's, that took place at an abandoned VA hospital outside of LA. I mean, that's how they do it. And when we drove up to that hospital, everybody was outside having a cigarette break. They were the actors, not the real people, the actors, but they were so closely modeled after the real people that Tony said they're, you know, he called them out one by one. There's Jessica, there's,
wow.
You knew who they were just from their clothes and their makeup and their hair. It was cool.
We've just got 30 seconds. We wish we had longer, but we don't. 30 seconds. What do you hope someone who reads your book kind of takes away? And just quickly, forgive me.
I hope it's a different look inside of the CIA. It tells you day to day what you might be doing, what kinds of operations you were supporting, what the pressures were, what the dangers were. It's a very realistic look at, from a woman's point of view, doing the work. What was it like, and what was it worth?
Well, thank you for that.
It's not just for women.
It's not what?
It's not just for women. No. A lot of men are going to enjoy reading this book.
Well, we appreciate getting a peek into your life and your career and a peek into the CIA. Jonna, thank you so much. Jonna Mendez, former CIA officer. Her new book is called In True Face, A Woman's Life in the CIA Unmasked. And she was joining us there from Western Virginia. You're listening and watching Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Master, Tim Stanovic. This is Bloomberg.
your company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
And yes, I'm John Tucker, the newsroom. Look at some of the companies we're following. Amazon.com expanding same-day delivery of prescription medication to New York City and the greater Los Angeles area. This allows customers to receive drugs for the flu, diabetes, and other conditions within hours. The company, via its Amazon Pharmacy division, using new small format facilities stocked with common medicines in order to accelerate deliveries. At a site in Brooklyn, for instance, a pharmacist and a fulfillment team will be able to process an order within a matter of minutes. Customers in College Station, Texas already can get their medications delivered in under an hour via drug drones. NBC, owned by Comcast, reevaluating its hiring of former Republican National Committee head Ronna McDaniel as a paid contributor. This follows a major internal backlash from some of the network's top on-air personalities. The network expected to make a decision about the hiring shortly. This according to a person with knowledge of the matter. Puck did report earlier today that the network planned to drop McDaniel over the past 2 days. NBC and MSNBC hosts, including Rachel Maddow, Chuck Todd, Joe Scarborough, Mika Brzezinski, issued on-air criticism of their boss's decision. As if your cardiologist didn't have enough to worry about, Krispy Kreme partnering with McDonald's to sell donuts at its restaurants. The chains apparently tested diners' appetite for the treats in 160 McDonald's restaurants in 2 Kentucky cities. I don't know why they picked Kentucky. According to the statement,
Maybe they like donuts.
the results exceeded expectations. What, they have like different tastes? Anyway, a donut, 190 calories. Big Mac meal, 1,100 calories. Just add that up. That's a lot of calories. That's your company news.
This is Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Massar and Tim Stennebeck on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
It is Bloomberg Business Week. Let's get a check on the latest world and national news with Nancy Lyons in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington, D.C. Hey, Nance.
Thanks, Tim. Transportation officials are on the scene of today's early morning ship collision in the port of Baltimore that caused the Francis Scott Key Bridge to collapse. NTSB Chair Jennifer Homendy says her team consists of 24 people, including nautical experts.
What they're going to look at and begin to collect is information on vessel operations, safety history, safety record. They'll look at the owner, they'll look at the operator, and they'll look at the operations this day. Today, they will also look at company policy.
Homendy says search and rescue operations are still underway, but she would not address whether there had been any fatalities. The U.S. Supreme Court heard arguments today regarding the use of an abortion drug that's been on the market since 2000. Mifepristone is used in more than half the abortions in the U.S., and recently the FDA eased restrictions on its use. Justice Alito questioned Jennifer Ellsworth, the attorney for the drug maker Danco.
Don't you think the FDA should have continued to require reporting of non-fatal consequences?
Your Honor, the FDA decided not to continue that reporting requirement in 2016 based on more than 15 years of a well-established safety profile when that reporting was required.
One question that was raised was if those bringing the suit, anti-abortion doctors, have the legal right to sue. The justices seemed inclined to keep mifepristone widely available. Well, now that an April 15th start date has been set for Donald Trump's trial on alleged hush money payments, the judge is out with some ground rules for the former president. Judge Juan Merchan has issued a gag order banning Trump from making statements about witnesses, lawyers, or jurors involved in the trial. This trial marks the first criminal prosecution of a former American president. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Nancy Lyons. Now back to you, Carol and Tim.
All right, Nance, thank you so much. So appreciate it. Hey, a quick headline crossing the Bloomberg terminal. Merck's sotatercept for high blood pressure gaining FDA approval. I hope I'm saying it. Sotatercept? Maybe that's sotatercept. So Merck.
I'm not going to argue with you
it's
about that.
It's a blood for high blood pressure gaining FDA approval. Sotatercept. That's why we have you around. Thank you. Stock's up 4% in the aftermarket.
Where do they come up? Who comes up with these names?
There are people paid lots of money to come up with these names, John Tucker.
It's always like, I never get it, right? It's always these names I certainly can't pronounce. And then it's like, now it's saying it's high blood pressure to be called Winrevair? So is it Maybe that's what they market it at. Anyway, stocks climbing in the aftermarket, so we'll watch that one tomorrow. What do you got for us, Tucker? Because we're getting ready to wrap up. We're done. I'm going to go join the CIA.
I just like this.
Maybe you're in it already, and this is just a cover.
Maybe this is a mask. Well, it is kind of a mask.
Well, it is. Yes.
Done well by our makeup team, which I'm very appreciative.
We got our makeup done today.
John and I were in the
special
makeup room
bonding.
together. That was kind of fun.
And the makeup artist let me comb her hair.
John came over to do my.
I was like
yeah.
playing with Barbie.
No.
Did you really do that?
Actually, if I recall correctly, you came over and they're like, no,
don't touch her.
Don't touch her.
What else you got? What else you got for us, John Tucker?
Break.
I don't have much. Well, the story I was doing about the delivery by drones of drugs, drug delivery drones, raises some interesting questions. Like, if I see a drone flying over my house, it wakes me up or annoys me. Yeah, I'm getting out the bird gun. It's going down.
I don't know what goes on.
And
in
what's
New
the
Jersey.
legal implications of shooting somebody else's drone if it's flying over my property?
That's a really great question.
Are you allowed to fire your bird gun on your property?
Well, I live in a part of New Jersey where not only is that legal, but it's actually encouraged.
You're from I didn't know you lived in that part of New
on
Jersey.
your property. Like, do you own the air rights of your property?
Yeah, I think I do, actually. So there you go.
John, why don't you test it out and see how, like,
No, there's a lot of
seriously.
there's a lot of bird hunting where I live, like ducks flying over. So I'll just say I thought it was
Been working with this dude for a million years, and you learn something something new every day.
Don't
anyway,
fly your drones over my house, please.
I thought you were going to say something else. All right, guys, check out Bloomberg.com for the latest on the collapse of that bridge. That's going to do it for us. Balance of Power starts now.
From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew. President Biden pledges to use federal funding to rebuild the Key Bridge in Baltimore, which collapsed this morning after being struck by a cargo ship. 6 people are still unaccounted for. Former Transportation Secretary Ray LaHood will join us with more. The Supreme Court hearing arguments today in a case that could restrict access to the abortion pill mifepristone, the first abortion-related case before the High Court since Roe was overturned. We'll talk this hour with legal scholar Carol Sangner of Columbia Law. And our new Bloomberg News Morning Consult poll brings good news for Joe Biden, showing the president gaining ground on Donald Trump in 6 of 7 swing states. We'll have much more coming up over the course of this hour on these new numbers. Thanks for being with us on this Tuesday, live from Washington, with breaking news this morning from Baltimore that has captivated the Capitol. We heard earlier from Maryland Governor Wes Moore speaking with reporters following this bridge collapse that happened around 1:30 a.m. when a cargo ship ran out of power and struck one of the pylons under the bridge. Here's the governor.
This is still very much an active search and rescue mission, and there is not a single resource that we will hold off on deploying. I have already authorized the deployment of everything from air, land, and sea resources to make sure that this search and rescue operation is carried out to its fullest intent.
With 6 souls still unaccounted for, we want to go straight to my partner, Kaylee Lines, who is in the field today at the scene of that bridge collapse in Baltimore. Kaylee, what can you tell us?
Well, Joe, you're absolutely right. There are still 6 individuals unaccounted for, and that is the priority of all of the authorities that are involved in this situation at this point. We heard it from Governor Wes Moore, Senate leaders that were here, Senate representatives and congressional representatives from Maryland, as well as Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, all reiterating right now search and rescue is the priority, the humans and families involved in this. Of course, very quickly thereafter, though, this will turn to a story of recovery. It's unclear what exactly the timeline will be to get this vital way back up and running here. Of course, there are 35,000 individuals that were going over this bridge daily in terms of commuter traffic, also freight and logistics that happens by road. But this is also one of the busiest ports in the United States of America, handles cargo, including autos, the most port handling of autos as any port in the country. 850,000 vehicles almost were handled here last year, in addition to commodities, including millions of tons of coal. So all of that is the economic ramification we have to think about today, and certainly that was on the mind of officials we spoke with here. But the problem is it could take a long time for this to sort itself out. Pete Buttigieg said the path to normalcy will not be easy, it will not be quick, and it will not be inexpensive. And on the point of expenses, on that point, Joe, we did hear from President Biden earlier today pledging that it will be the federal government that is paying this bill for the reconstruction of this bridge. Of course, he will require congressional approval for that in large part, and it's going to be a question of just how long that reconstruction will take, and of course the clearing out of the debris that is currently in the waterway behind me more immediately to get this port back open.
Kaylee, we're really glad that you're there today. Thank you for your reporting. Kaylee Lyons, of course, with us. She'll be back a little bit later on this hour when we speak to the former Transportation Secretary, Ray LaHood. We did hear from the president today from the White House. Here's President Biden from earlier.
I spoke with Governor Moore this morning, as well as the mayor of Baltimore, the county executive, both United States senators and the congressman. And my Secretary of Transportation is on the scene. I told them we're going to send all the federal resources they need as we respond to this emergency. And I mean all the federal resources. And we're going to rebuild that port together.
We now add the voice of Bloomberg White House correspondent Josh Wingrove. Josh, thanks for being with us today. President Biden, in that set of remarks, said the federal government will pay for the entire cost of rebuilding that bridge. We'll deal with potential liabilities later. That's the word from the White House. Now there are calls for him to actually go to Baltimore. Will he do that?
Yeah, I think that's up in the air right now, as is the question of whether Congress will ultimately agree to pay for this. This would be a pretty expensive project. We're talking probably years, maybe, to redo this thing, or at least that would be the normal time frame. Biden, at the very least, is going to shift the blame to Congress if they don't fund this thing. And so that's sort of where we're standing on that. In the meantime, I think we're going to see them heavily involved in that question of opening this channel up again once that search and rescue is complete. Biden and his administration put a lot of emphasis on that today, saying that is the priority. And of course, if that search and rescue mission turns into more of a recovery mission, then the question is, how can we get this channel open again, get this ship out of the way itself, get the debris out of the about 50-meter depth path? It's already kind of a squeak-through scenario for some of the bigger ships coming up here, so they need to basically clear it out pretty well to get things going again. And that'll really sort of address the immediate economic sort of chokehold factors here.
Once we get through the search and rescue operation, we want to be sensitive to the fact that they're still searching for 6 people, by the way. These were construction workers who were on that span when it went down. That's right. We've heard as many as 7. There's going to be an economic impact here that we have to acknowledge for a president who's been trying to fight inflation, watching shipping get moved around in the Red Sea. Now we're going to be steering around. Maersk says it will be rerouting around Baltimore. If you're with us on Bloomberg TV, you can see that bridge collapsing right now. Remarkable to watch that. This is a difficult scenario when we consider the impact on trade and pricing.
Yeah, I think, the particular sectors will be more heavily impacted. Baltimore's port, you heard Kaylee talk about. Autos, pretty significant, right? So if you're, for instance, waiting for a Ford in Minneapolis, you're probably okay. If you're waiting for a Volvo in Pittsburgh, maybe less so. I mean, it's going to be very sort of regional impacts from this. It's also an export terminal. We could see that start to pile up. And so that'll work its way through. But, we had a story today on the terminal about gas prices looking like they're going to go about $4 a gallon again this summer. There've already been these questions of whether the Red Sea attacks, as you mentioned, would sort of flare things up. This is sort of like a sort of more medium-term question. Again, search and rescue effort ongoing. But the political risk here for Joe Biden is that the supply chain snarls flare up again. Voters remember that they're ticked off about how expensive things are and have gotten over the course of the post-pandemic recovery, and that they have that top of mind heading into the fall election. But as of now, in particular with our poll coming out today, Biden does have some momentum, and I think obviously he'll hope that they can build off that.
We're going to get more into that now. Josh Wingrove, thank you so much for being with us. With the view from the White House, President Biden is gaining ground in that poll. This is the new Bloomberg News swing state poll. It's out today. Gaining ground on Donald Trump. Bloomberg senior editor Wendy Benjaminson is here with us now with details as we dig down into these numbers. Wendy, it's great to see you. These, again, are the 7 states that we believe will help to decide this election. And Joe Biden, when you look at Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, suddenly has a more interesting story to tell.
He absolutely does, as long as all the things that Josh just described don't happen and drag him down. But while this poll was in the field, it went out the day after his State of the Union address, which was widely considered to be a political success for him. He is now up 1 point in Wisconsin and tied in Pennsylvania and Michigan. And as Josh has written about, those 3 states are the states that will deliver either one of them, Donald Trump or Joe Biden, to the White House. And so if he can keep up that momentum in those industrial states and pick up the other states where he is narrowing the gap with Donald Trump in every state in our poll except Georgia, then, he actually, if he can keep that momentum going, he's in better shape than he was just a month ago. Now, gas prices hit $4 a gallon. He has another moment where he seems really old. All of that can turn around very quickly. One of the other things that was really interesting in our poll was we measured the depth of support for the candidate himself or for or how much it was a protest vote against the other guy. And for Trump voters, 3 out of 4 of them are voting for Donald Trump. Affirmatively, they are in it to see Donald Trump get the White House, while only a quarter of them are voting against Biden.
Sure, yep.
On the other hand, Biden voters, 45% of the people in swing states who are going to vote for Biden say they are doing it to stop Donald Trump. Not so much we think Joe Biden's a great guy.
Yeah.
And so that's something also the White House and the Biden campaign really has to measure.
Remarkable to see folks on both sides, by the way, and this is knowing that Donald Trump is promising to make the 2017 tax cuts permanent. Both sides favor taxing the rich, soak the rich,
really
more than $400,000. How do you vote for Donald Trump if you think billionaires should be taxed at a higher rate?
Yeah, that was really, really surprising to us. So we found out that about 70% of swing state voters across the board favor higher taxes, income taxes on people who make more than $400,000 a year, and a higher tax of some kind on billionaires, whether that's a wealth tax or not. And that included a majority of people who describe themselves as conservative or Republicans.
How about that?
And so if Joe Biden wins and wants to increase taxes, they also favor increasing the corporate tax rate, then Congress is going to have a hard time saying, no, our people don't want that, because their people do.
This is fascinating. It's worth the read. Find it on the terminal. And, of course, Bloomberg.com. Our thanks to Bloomberg's Wendy Benjaminson, who put a lot of time into making that poll accessible for us. Coming up, former U.S. Transportation Secretary Ray LaHood joins. And we'll have Kaylee Lyons with us live from Baltimore. It's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Another thing that startups need to look for is a market that is either started to undergo or is soon going to undergo exponential growth. I think this is actually related to one of the biggest mistakes investors make when evaluating startups. Investors always say, well, what's your growth rate? We care about the growth rate. Investors will forgive smallish revenue today if it's growing quickly. For some reason, people don't think about markets this way. But if you think about the most important startups, they are the ones that I start in small markets that are growing very, very quickly. 11 years ago, the market for iPhone apps was $0. It's now huge. And I think if you only think about the TAM today, you'll make a big mistake. What you really want to do is identify a market that's going to grow every year and be able to ride that up elevator.
Welcome to the digital age. Are you struggling to stand out here? Don't worry. Meet Blue TV, who is your digital superhero.
Blue TV is a multi-purpose online media network that also provides digital marketing services. We are based in Islamabad, Pakistan. We are expert in creative marketing, social media and digital marketing, search engine optimization, web design, page rank, and SERPs, video editing, recording and production.
So, what are you waiting for? Pick up the phone and call or WhatsApp Blue TV on given number, or visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/blue.online.tv.
With Blue TV, your business growth will be skyrocketed.
I want a bank that shows me what I spend instantly.
We're Monzo. Give us a go. See?
I want a bank that can help me budget for the things I need, like a new leather jacket for Bingo.
We can do that.
Bingo's my cockapoo.
Hi, Bingo.
It's a real faff to sign up.
It takes less than 10 minutes.
Race you.
You're on. Time's up. How'd you get on?
It's a draw.
Is it? We hear you, Bingo. You make Monzo Monzo.
My general advice is continue to seek out companies or people that are maybe one stage or two stages ahead of you. And I think this is generalizable to not just to startups, but anyone seeking fast growth in their own professional lives, in their careers too. What does greatness look like? Try to seek out people who've been there, done that before, and then try to not connect with one, but try to interview 3, 5, 10 people to see what is a general pattern of greatness that look like that will get you to the next level of the company, next stage, maybe a year, 12 months from now, 24 months from now. Seek out people who kind of went down the path a few times. Then you'll start to find this pattern that start to emerge. What are things that you need to have 12 months from now, 24 months from now that you currently don't have? Then try to like build a path towards that. It's almost like Amazon's or Jeff Bezos' mantra of working backwards. Think about what your end game or next stage look like, and then figure out your steps to getting there, and who do you need to work with, upgrading or coaching your existing team or recruiting from somewhere else to really level your leadership. Because ultimately, the job of a CEO is to do 3 things, right? One is get the strategy right for your company, making sure it's executed, get the right teams onboarded, getting the resources, whether it be fundraising or allocating your resources. So it's strategy, people, or team, figuring out how you need to navigate those things to get to the next level.
If you look at what happened in Pennsylvania when the bridge collapsed there, again, different circumstances, but the rebuilding took place very quickly because of the commitment of the federal government, DOT, and the state's DOTs. Now, look at the first and top priority is to continue to search for those who have been lost, those that were on the bridge. And once that is complete, then you'll see a comprehensive plan for reopening the port, reopening the channel, and replacing the bridge. And I think it'll be a timetable with all of these people working together that can be sooner rather than later.
Well, sir, I spoke with both senators from Maryland earlier today who were talking about the humans that we have to consider here, not just those who are still unaccounted for and their families, but also those who have jobs at this port, knowing this is a major economic engine for the state of Maryland. And while we are seeing that cargo operators and companies who have cargo that would through this port are starting to divert, both suggested to me they want to make sure that cargo does come back to the port of Baltimore. Would you have any concern that just the flow of transport may be permanently changed by this rather than just temporarily displaced?
Not at all. I think the port is such a significant port, its location, the way that it's managed, the way that they're able to deliver goods in and out of that port. As soon as the channel can be reopened, the port will be reopened. That will mean having to remove the bridge that's collapsed. That's going to take a little time. But as the governor said and the mayor has said, top priority is finding the people that have been lost from the fact that they were on the bridge and trying to locate them. Once that's done, I think you'll see very, very quick activity in getting the port open.
Secretary LaHood, you don't need me to tell you there are thousands of bridges, tens of thousands of bridges around this country that are structurally deficient. That's why we went through the process of getting this bipartisan infrastructure law that the president's been talking about a lot lately. But Wes Moore today, the governor, said that this bridge was up to code. So it strikes me this is not an infrastructure story we're talking about. I guess my question is, should bridges be able to withstand an impact from a cargo ship like this? Was this really something that was the fault of the shipping company or the structure of the bridge?
The bridge was built in 1977, long before Baltimore became the significant port that it is today. It is a significant port in our country and in the world, and that bridge was built well before that. I do believe that if you look at structures that are built today, and I have, that the new bridges are built to a much, much higher standard, and that's the way the new bridge will be built along this corridor also.
Sir, you, of course, in addition to being Secretary of Transportation, served as a member of Congress. And knowing that President Biden has said that the federal government will be footing the bill for the reconstruction of this bridge, that is something that would require congressional approval. And we haven't seen Congress be the most functional in the funding department as of late. Would you have any concern about that funding being approved?
Not one bit. This is like a hurricane that hits an area. It's like a tornado that hits an area. What happens is Congress steps up, appropriates the money, and takes care of the people and takes care of the region that's impacted by some kind of a weather calamity, whether it's a fire, whether it's a hurricane or tornado. I have no doubt that Congress will step up under the leadership of the Maryland delegation, under the leadership of the White House, and provide the funding that's needed to rebuild the bridge.
Secretary, we're glad you could share your experience with us today. Former Transportation Secretary Ray LaHood, thank you for the insights. Kaylee Lyons will be back with us a bit later this hour from Baltimore. Coming up, a massive windfall for former President Donald Trump, at least on paper. Did you follow the SPAC today? We'll have more on that next. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Wild stock swings today, the first day of trading for former President Donald Trump's social media firm, Trump Media and Technology Group, making its debut on the public market and potentially adding billions of dollars to Donald Trump's fortune. We know he needs the money. For more, let's bring in Bloomberg's Bailey Lipschultz, who's had eyes on this since before this went public. Bailey, it's great to see you. Look, we spent the balance of this year talking about cash burn and the Trump campaign bleeding money, whether he can post bond in a civil trial in New York. How much does he actually stand to make today? How much did he make on paper?
Yeah, so in total, Joe, right now with the stock valued at about $7.9 billion, he's worth about $4.5 billion on paper. And that number can get closer to $6 billion when using where the stock closed at if it continues to perform well, because as part of the deal, if the stock trades above $17.50 for 20 of 30 days, well, then they give tens of millions of dollars to Trump media insiders, of which Trump owns the majority of that. So the potential billions upon billions of windfall could deliver a big payday, again, on paper for Donald Trump.
How long does he have to lock this in? How long is the lockup?
Currently, as the terms stand, 6 months. That could be edged forward slightly based on some of the terms of the deal, or if the board, which is made up of members of his administration, as well as insiders at the company like CEO Devin Nunes and the Digital World CEO Eric Swider, if they move that deadline forward, he could sell sooner than later. But again, kind of to that point where he would make more money on paper if it trades well for 20 or 30 days. It does kind of seem like maybe that'll be a bit of a walk and dance in the next few weeks.
Remarkable headline with your byline on the terminal, Bailey. Trump Media now the most expensive U.S. stock to bet against. Does everyone think this is going to zero?
There's a lot of skepticism, Joe. This is a company, again, valued north of $7 billion. In the 9 months through September, it brought in just $3.4 million. So on any real traditional valuation metric, it's probably overvalued relative to peers and fits into the meme stock category, but that's why it gets so risky, because it's difficult to borrow shares this short, and also there's so much inherent risk that when a stock that jumps 58%, just because it's ticker changed and it's associated with the former president, there's risk, again, like the GameStop mania, that it could continue to move higher.
Heard a few references to GameStop today. Bailey, all of this said here, Donald Trump sitting back enjoying this story tonight. You're telling us that he could move up the date to cash some of this in. This is a company that's never made money, correct?
Correct, and it's really a new company. So this deal was struck in October 2021, basically on this idea that something called Truth Social would be launched in early 2022. They lived up to that. Right. Donald Trump, though, only really has 6.8 million followers on that platform, so not living up to the expectations some had.
Fascinating. We'll keep our eyes on this. I wonder how it opens tomorrow. Bloomberg's Bailey Lipschultz, thank you. As always, coming up, we'll have more on the Baltimore Bridge collapse. We're going to talk about how U.S. ports might be impacted, the economic side of this important story next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
every day the harbor's closed, it's millions and millions of dollars lost to the local economy. People are going to be out of work. They're not going to get paychecks. We got to move with great dispatch. But first, let's see whether we can't save some lives.
Democratic Senator Ben Cardin of Maryland earlier today speaking with Bloomberg's Kaylee Lines at the site of the bridge collapse earlier. Kaylee is back with us now, having spent much of the day in that very spot. Kaylee, what can you tell us?
Well, Joe, we are now 16 hours from 1:30 a.m. Eastern Time, which is when the Dolly, this vessel, collided with the Key Bridge and it subsequently collapsed. That is just how long this search and rescue effort has been underway. Of course, 2 members of a construction crew that were on the bridge at the time were rescued, one of which was hospitalized. 6 others, though, still remain unaccounted for, and that remains the priority of all of the first responders and authorities involved in this effort, is first and foremost trying to, as we heard the senator say, save lives if they can. Very quickly, though, it will move to a question of recovery and just how long it will take to get transit, and specifically waterborne transit, in and out of this port once again moving. It could be a long haul, as we're talking about autos, commodities, other shipments, imports and exports that move through this port have been disrupted. Companies diverting their cargoes to other ports along the coast, including New York and Norfolk down in Virginia. And of course, commuters and freight distribution that have used this bridge consistently every single day are now having to go the long way around, potentially adding miles to those journeys. So really, it's going to be a matter of sequence. Senator Cardin, in a press conference earlier this afternoon, did say first and foremost, search and rescue, then get the port reopened, and then work on reconstructing the bridge. And on the reconstruction, President Biden today said that he does expect the federal government will be paying for that. It is something that would require congressional approval if he has to make a supplemental request. And I actually asked Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen about that earlier today, just how this funding was going to be broken down. This is what he told me.
There are some funds in what's called the Emergency Relief Fund. This is a fund within the Federal Highway Administration that is there specifically for this kind of emergency. So once the state makes its submission, which I think they're going to do very shortly, some of those funds can begin to be drawn down. Now, for the larger, longer-term costs, yes, we're going to call upon our colleagues in Congress.
And both he and Senator Cardin did express to me confidence that it will indeed pass Congress. But of course, as we just heard Senator Van Hollen say, we're talking long-term here. This is probably going to take a while. No one to this point has been willing to put a timeline on either the port reopening or on reconstruction. Everyone still remains at this hour focused on the search and rescue efforts that are ongoing here in the Baltimore area, Joe.
We're lucky to have you there for us, Kaylee. Thank you. My partner, Kaylee Lines, live from Baltimore, where that bridge collapsed in the wee hours. Another major story that's resonating in Washington today and nationally, the Supreme Court signaling that it is likely to support access to the abortion pill mifepristone. We were, of course, listening to arguments today, and joining us now, Carol Sanger, Columbia Law School professor, author of About Abortion, Terminating Pregnancy in the 21st Century. Carol, it's great to have you with us here. I'm wondering what you heard in those arguments today, and if this conventional wisdom is that the Supreme Court will support mifepristone, support access. Is that how you heard it?
That is how I heard it. And it's interesting that we're now calling this Supreme Court conventional wisdom, that it might actually favor pro-choice policies, because that's not their reputation. And we know we last saw them in the Dobbs case a year and a half ago, where they removed the Roe right to abortion as a federal constitutional right. So, yes, that's what I heard. And it came as not a surprise, because if you read the briefs, you see things really were tending that way. But there was some, I won't say enthusiasm, but the justices seemed very clear in their views and not skeptical of the approach that they seem to be taking, which is to use a very neutral doctrine to get rid of this case. And that's the doctrine of standing, which is a kind of neutral principle in law that says, if you're going to bring a case against somebody or something, you have to have been injured. You just can't come up and say, I don't like that. You have to show that you suffered an injury. And the doctors who are pro-life and anti-abortion who brought this case can't show that they are in any way harmed by the regulations that they're objecting to.
I want to bring our listeners and viewers inside the arguments for just a moment. A compelling moment for Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch, who questioned whether those against abortion have standing, to your point, to sue earlier today. Here's how he put it.
We have before us a handful of individuals who've asserted a conscience objection. And this case seems like turning what could be a small lawsuit into a nationwide legislative assembly.
What does that tell you, Carol, when you hear Justice Gorsuch articulating that point?
Well, it's from my point of view, it's encouraging, and it has integrity to it, because it would be a real stretch to see how this case could come out otherwise. It would look terrifically political if the judges were suddenly to say, no, actually the FDA had it all wrong. We've got to get rid of that drug, mifepristone. It's no good for women. One of the interesting things here is that mifepristone is now used by about 2/3 of all women who have abortions, which is amazing, because it was like 30% a couple of years ago, and it's simply so effective, and it has so many advantages that it's now the method of choice. And so I like to think about the justices taking seriously what women are telling them. Not that women are determining the decision, but that they're paying attention to what women are doing.
I want to get to the point of this case to the extent that we can, to simplify this for our audience. Carol, is this about access to abortion or the mail?
Well, that's a good question. It's about neither and both. First of all, it's about one particular method of abortion, and that's the abortion pill, which is different than a procedure where a pill, all you do is you take a pill or 2 pills in most cases. And so it's about that. And it's also about who gets to say what the rules are about the medications that are used in abortion. And here we know the FDA has to approve all medications. And so 20 years ago, they approved this drug and had tons of evidence and testing and studies showing how safe it was. And then 20 years later, these objections were thrown at them. So the FDA is sticking, and they're saying, we took scientific things into consideration. We're not political on this. Does this drug work? Is it safe for people to take it? Yes and yes. And so so it's the kind of drug, the procedures that went into approving it in the first place. And this goes back to what you said, what you pointed out about Gorsuch. He said, listen, we can't have a couple of doctors who disagree with legal abortion going out and sort of changing the rule across the nation. And that's what this would do if the court were to find out that the plaintiffs did have standing. And they simply don't. They can't show that they're injured in any way. And one of the reasons is that they are given a conscience exemption. So if you're a doctor and you don't want to perform abortions, in most states you don't have to do it. And so where's your harm? You're not being asked to violate what you truly believe. And that would seem to me a very important part of what some of the justices were getting at as well. Justice Coney Barrett, for example.
I'm glad we could walk through this together, Carol. Appreciate your insights today. Carol Sanger with us from Columbia Law School. We thank you for the insights today. To Carol's point, if the court did side with the opponents in this case, it would be the first time ever the Supreme Court second-guessed a status like this from the FDA. Coming up, President Biden is gaining ground in 6 of 7 swing states. This comes after 5 months of mostly consistent Trump leads. Our political panel next on our latest swing state poll. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Kaylee Lyons is in the field. President Biden has gained ground against Donald Trump in 6 of 7 key swing states, according to a Bloomberg News and Morning Consult poll out this morning. For more on the shift, we are joined by Lisa Camuso-Miller, former RNC Communications Director, host of the Friday Reporter podcast, alongside Kristen Hahn of Rock Solutions. Great to see you both with us here. Kristen, as a Democrat, I'm assuming that you are encouraged. This is the most newsy Bloomberg poll that we have seen since the first one that established Joe Biden's deficit that he now is apparently making up for in some important areas.
I think it's, it's a natural trend because, Trump is the candidate now. There's nobody else, competing with him, even if it was just, Nikki Haley and not doing so well. Yeah. But, we're kind of consolidating. The president's getting more aggressive. I think you'll see him be more aggressive against the former president. So, yes, obviously very encouraged, but we still have a long way to go. Some still within the margin of error. So we have a lot of room.
Lisa, our pollsters and our partners at Morning Consult went into the field the day after the State of the Union. We keep hearing there's no bounce after the State of the Union. What's wrong with this guy? It's different this time. Are we actually seeing it now?
Oh, I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly there was a very different disposition from the president in that State of the Union address than we have seen over the course of the last several months. So there's a lot of energy. There's a lot of emphasis. I think he really did an excellent job demonstrating that he still had the fight in his gut to go back and come back and forth as it relates to the debate and the presidential. And so, yeah, I do definitely think that that's what we're seeing here.
He's still tied in Pennsylvania. And I realize there's improvement there. He was losing in Pennsylvania before. But this is the state he's been to more than any other. He calls it home. He points to Scranton. He dropped his budget there. If he's tied in Pennsylvania, what does that tell us about the rest of the country?
I mean, I think that we've got a fight on our hands. He's got to get the message out, everything that he's accomplished with, both Republicans and Democrats in Congress, and really speak to the American people about who he is as a person. Because at the end of the day, he's running against somebody who is just, morally corrupt, I think. So, it's an election is as much about what you do and it is as who you are. So,
when you start to break down this poll into some of the issues, taxing the rich really jumped out to me. A fascinating idea because it's shared by both sides here. Now, if you're a Trump supporter, you might have heard about the 2017 tax cuts. You might have heard that he wants to cut the corporate tax rate. But a vast majority of Trump and Biden supporters think we should soak the rich. What am I missing here?
Well, I think that this is clearly a demonstration of how people are feeling as it relates to their own personal budgets, Joe.
Yeah.
And they really feel like there should be a greater share of the burden put onto the wealthy. And that's, I think, where we're seeing it over and over again.
And how do you support a billionaire who's spending small donations on his legal fees?
Joe, if I had the answer for that, I might not be sitting with you today.
We've got a gap here. We've got a disconnect here that this poll has identified.
Absolutely right. And I think that that's the one that we're probably going to have to dive into and understand better. The truth of it is, though, that everything you see from Republican voters and from Democratic voters is that they want more support as it relates to the economy. And so that's where I think there is a disconnect. If we looked at the finances of both of these candidates that are running for office, I suspect that they both have very, very full pockets and not necessarily the relative pockets of you and me and Kristen. But I think also, too, that the issue itself comes back to just that people care about the economy and they want it to improve.
Well, so how does Joe Biden get to that? Does he run as Amtrak Joe? People have seen the mansion and all this stuff. They saw where the documents were held. Or does he describe himself as blessed and somebody who's been fortunate in his career?
I mean, I think he can do both, but he's been a lifelong public servant. He's been somebody who's really been able to speak to everyday Americans and really kind of relate to them about the struggles that they go through. And I think
he
that
used
if you
to
let
tout
him be
himself
him,
as the least wealthy member of the Senate. Now we're talking about mansions in Delaware, Corvettes, and the rest.
Well, I mean, I still think that he's the candidate that that people can relate to. Although President Trump has somehow managed to be a billionaire, perhaps, who is spoken to people who don't think that politicians have spoken to them in the past.
That's right.
And that's where his base is coming from.
And so they make an exception in that case. He's the messenger who's bringing the issues that they want. If he's a rich guy, so be it.
I think he also, too, up until, even now, he really speaks to that audience about how he can also make them successful. There is something in his words that make that base, that MAGA wing of the party, really feel like Donald Trump is going to fight for me. He is going to put those millions and billions that are in his pocket, and they're going to help me get there, too. I don't know why it is or how it is. It's definitely a voodoo magic that I don't necessarily understand. But I do think that still is very much part of why they stand behind him, is because they believe that he, more than a lifelong public servant, as you mentioned, Kristen, is someone that is going to be fighting for them when it comes time for him to return to the White House in their eyes.
One of the states that jumped off the page where we're seeing Joe Biden advance is Wisconsin. You must still have PTSD when you think about 2016 and Wisconsin. Is this campaign learning from Hillary Clinton?
Yes. I mean, I think that there are a lot of lessons to be learned from 2016. And, from what I've seen, a lot of those changes have been put into place.
Yeah.
And I think that we were caught off guard. Democrats being we were caught off guard in a lot of ways. And I don't think that you'll see that happen this time.
The blue wall will be in place.
Yes.
Yes.
I think so.
There you have it from Kristen Hahn. Coming up, President Biden says the U.S. should pay to rebuild the Baltimore Bridge entirely. Federal funding. We'll be back with Lisa and Kristen, our political panel, to delve into this. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Okay, today I'm going to talk about how to succeed with a startup. Obviously, more than can be said here in 20 minutes, but I will do the best I can. The most important thing, the number one lesson we try to teach startups is that the degree to which you're successful approximates the degree to which you build a product that is so good, people spontaneously tell their friends about it. Startups always ask us for the secret to success. They always want to believe it's something other than this, because this is really hard to do. But this is it. If you can build a product that is so good, people spontaneously tell their friends about it, you have done 80% of the work that you need to be a really successful startup. If you think about the most successful companies you know, Google, Facebook, whatever, you probably found out about them because a friend of yours said, you got to try this, it's great. So this is the bar. Something that people love so much they tell their friends about it. One important indicator for a product like that is a product that's simple to explain and easy to understand. If you can't explain in a few words what you do, and if at least some people don't say, oh, that's pretty interesting, that's usually a mistake. It's usually a sign of unclear thinking or a need that is not big enough.
I want a bank that shows me what I spend instantly.
We're Monzo. Give us a go. See?
Well, I want a bank that can help me budget for the things I need, like a new leather jacket for Bingo.
We can do that.
Bingo's my cockapoo.
Hi, Bingo.
It's a real faff to sign up.
It takes less than 10 minutes.
Race you.
You're on. Time's up. How'd you get on?
It's a draw.
Is it? We hear you, Bingo. You make Monzo Monzo.
Be an infrastructure story. This appears to have been an accident, if we can call it that. But this is a test for a lot of elected officials, beginning with Joe Biden. We heard from him today. We saw Governor Wes Moore. We saw the senators, members of Congress, of course, Pete Buttigieg, all of them under the microscope now in the way this has been handled. How does a politician face that challenge? You've spent many years communicating and helping elected officials prepare for a moment like this.
I was on the ground in August of 2007 in Minneapolis when they lost the bridge. The president spoke about it August 1st.
Yeah.
Congress unanimously agreed to pay for the reconstruction by the 7th or the 8th of August. So it was within a week. But we're living in a very different political reality right now, and I would hope. This is a major artery. This is a major corridor for the Northeast. It is something that it absolutely will affect. Your earlier guest said the same, Joe. This will affect the economy in this region and all across the country for years to come. And so this, to me, is a very easy yes vote for everyone in the Congress to get action and money back to where it belongs. By the way, the city of Baltimore does not need any more knocks on their corner either. They've got enough troubles themselves.
Look at that. For those of you with us on Bloomberg TV, just watching the image, the video of that bridge collapsing, it happened in the blink of an eye, Kristen. Will this be a controversy on Capitol Hill? The president today, without any warning, called for the federal government to pay for this in its entirety.
I certainly hope not. I mean, I do agree with Lisa. We're kind of in unprecedented times when it comes to the rancor on Capitol Hill. But generally, when there are massive, whether it's a hurricane or an incident like this, that the members come together. It happens in different states, but, the federal government has a responsibility. Like Lisa said, it's a major corridor. So my hope is that they will put their politics aside.
So when they come back from Easter, there's going to be a supplemental budget request. Is that what we should anticipate?
I would anticipate
an emergency request.
Yeah.
In terms of the optics, in terms of the communications here, does Joe Biden need to go to Baltimore?
I would be surprised if he didn't, but also, too, you know what it looks like when a president moves. It creates way too much. There's so much more that impacts. And so right now, the most important thing is that the search and rescue has got to be happening right now. And so if you're the president and you're all the people that go with him whenever he travels, you know that just creates more chaos. Sure. And so he absolutely should stay where he is right now and let all the people there that are doing the work that needs to be done to get done.
Well, I think we can say with a straight face he could likely be more effective by staying at the White House. That would be a political move. It would be optics. But he was criticized heavily for not showing up in East Palestine, Ohio, even though the administration, like today with Pete Buttigieg, was on the ground immediately.
I think it was a little bit different, but he's sending the Secretary of Transportation as his representative. So he's not absent. I do think this is a different situation. You've got search and rescue, recovery, but George W. Bush was also criticized for not being going to when Katrina hit. So this is something that people criticize presidents for it. I don't necessarily think that it's warranted.
Well, they tend to want to head things off as well. I wouldn't be surprised if he showed up there in the coming weeks. To your point, though, this might be a little bit early as this remains a search and rescue operation, one that we're going to keep you posted on here on Bloomberg TV and radio, on the terminal, and at Bloomberg.com. Kaylee Lyons will stay in Baltimore for us to bring us the latest. Our thanks to Lisa Camuso-Miller and Kristen Hahn for a great conversation. Your insights are important to us. Check out the Washington Edition newsletter, as I mentioned, on the terminal and online for the very latest on all of this. We thank you for joining us on Balance of Power. For Kaylee Lyons in Baltimore, I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. This is Bloomberg.